Chapter 1: The Highest Branches. The world Jonah Vance left behind was a place of humming servers and the sterile blue light of 100 monitors. It smelled of ozone and stale coffee. This world, the one he stepped into, smelled of damp soil so rich it was almost sweet, of pine needles and of immense, ancient patience. The air was thick, cool, and clean. It filled his lungs and seemed to scour the residue of a decade spent coding in sealed rooms. A woman named Saren greeted him at the base of the first tree. She was his guide, his point of contact from the encrypted server where he first found the application for the Ethelberg Society. She had a smile which seemed permanently etched onto her face, and eyes the color of moss after a rain. "You made it," she said. Her voice was a gentle melody. "The final climb is always the hardest part of the journey." Jonah shifted the weight of his pack on his shoulders. The final climb had been a 3-hour trek up a barely there trail. He was not a man built for hiking. He was a man built for ergonomic chairs. "The directions were precise," he replied, his own voice sounding rough and foreign in the quiet grove. Saren's smile did not waver. "Precision is a virtue. Come, your new life is waiting." She turned and began to ascend a spiral staircase carved directly into the trunk of a redwood. The tree was a monster, a titan of bark and wood whose upper reaches were lost in the dense canopy and low-hanging mist. The stairs were worn smooth by the passage of countless feet. A thick rope, slick with moisture, served as a handrail. Jonah followed, his breath already shortening. The ascent was dizzying. With every turn, the forest floor dropped away, its details blurring into a tapestry of green and brown. He stopped thinking about the exertion and started thinking about the height. He made the mistake of glancing down. His stomach lurched. The ground was a distant, irrelevant thing. They reached the first platform, a wide disk of wood securely bolted to the main trunk. It served as a junction. From it, rope bridges fanned out in 3 directions, vanishing into the green haze. The engineering of it all was staggering. The bridges were woven from thick rope, with planks of wood for footing. They swayed almost imperceptibly in the high-altitude breeze. "Impressive," Jonah managed, his hands gripping the rope railing of the platform. "We are a community of builders," Saren said, her tone light. "We build our homes, we build our connections. We build a sanctuary from the rootless world below. You'll see." She led him across one of the bridges. It was a longer walk than it appeared. The sway was more pronounced in the middle, a gentle, rhythmic bounce which spoke of immense tensile strength. Jonah focused on the platform at the other end, refusing to look down again. He could hear the faint sound of wind, but it was different up here. It carried a low, resonant hum, almost like a voice, but without words. The society was a city in the trees. It was a web of platforms, walkways, and circular homes built into and around the colossal redwoods. Ladders and bridges connected everything. Small gardens, lush with vegetables, grew in wide planters on sun-drenched platforms. The air hummed not with electricity but with life. People moved with a slow, deliberate grace, their faces calm. They offered him soft smiles and quiet nods as he passed. No one stared. No one seemed surprised to see a newcomer. It was as if they had been expecting him his entire life. Saren led him to a small, circular dwelling, its walls made of curved wood and its roof a cone of expertly layered bark shingles. "This will be your home for now," she announced. "Settle in. Dinner is in 2 hours at the great hearth. You'll hear the chimes." The inside was simple, clean, and smelled of cedar. A bed, a small table, a chair. A single, round window offered a breathtaking view of the canopy, a sea of green stretching to the horizon. There were no screens, no wires, no blinking lights. Jonah dropped his pack. The silence was absolute, broken only by the distant whisper of the wind. For the first time in years, he felt the tight knot of anxiety in his chest begin to loosen. This was real. This was the escape he had craved. He unpacked his few belongings, some clothes, a few paper books, a water bottle. His phone had lost its signal hours ago. He switched it off and buried it at the bottom of his pack. He sat on the bed and ran a hand over the rough-spun blanket. He had paid a significant sum to be here, liquidated his assets, and signed a dozen forms promising to adhere to the community's principles. The core principle was disconnection. A full year with no contact with the outside world. It had sounded extreme. Now it sounded like salvation. 2 hours later, a series of soft, wooden chimes echoed through the trees. Jonah left his new home and followed the flow of people moving along the walkways. They moved without speaking, their bare feet making soft padding sounds on the wood. The path led to the largest platform he had yet seen, built around the thickest tree. A massive, hollowed-out stone pit sat in the center, a bonfire crackling merrily within. This was the great hearth. Dozens of people sat on benches arranged in concentric circles around the fire. A man with long, gray hair tied with a leather cord smiled at Jonah and patted the empty space beside him. Jonah sat. A woman handed him a wooden bowl filled with a fragrant stew. He ate. It was the best food he had ever tasted. Rich, savory, with a complex blend of herbs he couldn't name. It warmed him from the inside out. A man rose to speak. He was older, with a network of fine lines around his calm, clear eyes. He moved with a startling vitality, his posture straight, his voice carrying over the crackle of the flames without any need for amplification. "We welcome a new branch to our tree," the man said, his gaze finding Jonah. "Jonah Vance has left the noise behind. He has come here to find his roots, to listen to the song of the wood instead of the scream of the wire." The man's name was Olin Fallow. He spoke for nearly an hour. His words were a soothing balm. He spoke of the sickness of the modern world, of its frantic pace, its shallow connections, its obsession with the artificial. He spoke of the forest as a living entity, a great breathing being which offered solace and strength to those who learned to listen. Jonah, a man who built his life on logic and code, found himself captivated. Olin's philosophy was simple, elegant, and deeply seductive. As the second bowl of stew was passed around, Jonah felt a profound sense of peace settle over him. The food, the fire, Olin's words, the quiet dignity of the people around him, it all combined into a powerful anesthetic for his weary mind. His anxieties, his deadlines, his failures, they all seemed like a story from another man's life. Later, as he walked back to his dwelling under a canopy pierced by 1,000,000 stars, he felt a lightness he hadn't experienced since childhood. The rope bridges seemed less intimidating, their sway a gentle rocking, like a cradle. He reached his platform and paused, leaning against the railing. He looked out over the darkened canopy, a vast, undulating landscape of shadow. The wind picked up, and with it came that strange, humming sound again, closer this time. It was a complex harmony of low notes. He scanned the opposite side of the small canyon of air which separated his section of the community from the next. And he saw it. For a moment his mind struggled to process the image. High up on the trunk of a distant redwood, something long and dark was hanging. It was not a vine nor a loose piece of bark. It was too uniform, too deliberate. It was the length of a tall man. As he stared, a gust of wind caught it and it unfurled slightly. For a split second in the faint starlight, it looked like a strip of dark cloth or leather. Then it shifted, and the illusion broke. It contracted, pulling itself tighter against the tree, its texture and color blending with the redwood's bark until it became nearly invisible once more. It was a perfect, seamless camouflage. Jonah squinted, his heart beginning a slow, heavy drumbeat against his ribs. What was that? Some kind of animal, a piece of equipment he didn't recognize. The people here were practical. Everything had a purpose. A long, dark shape clinging to a tree 100 feet in the air served no purpose he could imagine. The wind hummed its strange song through the branches. The shape did not move again. Jonah told himself it was a trick of the light, a shadow cast by an unfamiliar branch. His city eyes were not accustomed to the deep, living darkness of a forest at night. He was tired from his journey. The stew had made him drowsy. He went inside his new home, the simple wooden door closing with a quiet click. He lay on the bed, but the image of the dark shape remained burned into his vision. The profound peace he had felt only moments before was gone. In its place, a single, cold question began to grow, like a weed in a well-tended garden. What had he seen? Chapter 2. The Rules of the Wood. The first week passed in a blur of serene routine. Jonah was assigned to the garden crew, tending to rows of kale and beans under the patient guidance of a woman named Kaya. She was the community's herbalist, a woman with dirt permanently embedded in the lines of her palms. She explained how every plant had a purpose, every root a role. Her meals continued to be a source of deep, almost narcotic comfort. Jonah found a simple satisfaction in the physical labor, in the feeling of sore muscles and the tangible results of his work. The memory of the dark shape on the tree trunk began to fade, dismissed as a waking dream. On the seventh day, Olin Fallow sought him out. The leader appeared on the garden platform as silently as a shadow. "You are settling in well, Jonah," Olin said. It was not a question. His eyes had a way of making you feel completely transparent. Your hands are learning the language of the soil. "It's quiet work," Jonah replied, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of a dirty forearm. "The best work is," Olin agreed. "Walk with me. There is more to our home I wish to show you." They left the gardens, Olin leading the way across the familiar bridges and walkways. He moved with an easy, confident stride, his feet seeming to anticipate the gentle sway of the structures. He pointed out the different areas of the community: the workshop where furniture was made and tools were repaired, the weaving house where looms turned plant fibers into cloth, the cisterns where rainwater was collected and purified. It was a closed, self-sustaining system of remarkable ingenuity. "We provide for ourselves," Olin explained, his voice calm and steady. "The rootless world believes strength comes from consumption, from taking. We have learned that true strength comes from cultivation, from giving back to the whole what you take for yourself." Their walk took them to a part of the treetop city Jonah had not yet explored. The bridges here were older, the ropes frayed in places, the wood darker and covered in a thick carpet of moss. The air was cooler, the canopy above denser, blocking out much of the sunlight. They arrived at a small, isolated platform built around a dead, pale tree. Its bark was white and peeling, and it stood in stark contrast to the vibrant redwoods surrounding it. The trunk was covered in objects, dozens of them nailed crudely to the wood. Jonah slowed his pace, his eyes taking in the strange collection: a tarnished silver watch, a single worn hiking boot, a pair of cracked eyeglasses, a faded photograph of a smiling family, its edges curled from exposure to the damp air. "What is this place?" Jonah asked, his voice a low murmur. "This is the souvenir tree," Olin said, his tone gentle. "When one chooses to join us, they leave behind an object, a symbol of the life they have shed, a reminder that their attachments to the world below are severed. It is a way to lighten the soul for its new journey." Jonah looked at the items again. A driver's license, the face on it young and hopeful. A child's stuffed rabbit, its button eyes staring blankly. It was not a monument to new beginnings. It felt like a graveyard. He saw a space on the trunk, empty and waiting. He thought of the phone buried in his pack. "A powerful symbol," Jonah said, choosing his words carefully. "Symbols have power," Olin agreed, placing a hand on the dead tree's trunk. "They root our beliefs in the physical world. Just as we have our symbols, we also have our rules. Simple but important." He turned to face Jonah, his expression serious. "We have 3 great rules. The first, you will contribute. You will work for the betterment of the community. You have already shown you understand this. The second, you will not speak of the world below. It is a dream from which we have all awakened. To speak of it is to invite the nightmare." Jonah nodded. The rule made sense within the context of their philosophy. Disconnection had to be absolute. "And the third rule," Olin continued, his voice dropping slightly, becoming more intense. "The most important rule of all, you will never ever touch the ground. The canopy is our home, it is our sanctuary. The forest floor is a different world. It is not for us. To descend is to be exiled. Am I clear?" The finality in his tone was absolute. There was no room for questions. "Yes," Jonah said, "clear." "Good," Olin's serene smile returned. "Our rules are our foundation. They keep us safe. They keep us whole." They continued their walk, leaving the souvenir tree behind. They approached the longest rope bridge Jonah had yet seen. It spanned a wide, deep chasm between 2 of the largest redwoods, and it was shrouded in a thicker mist than the rest of the community. He could see strange, faintly glowing fungi clinging to the ropes and the sides of the trees. "This is the Bridge of Whispers," Olin said, gesturing for Jonah to precede him. Jonah stepped onto the bridge. The air was immediately colder. The low hum he sometimes heard in the wind was much stronger here, a constant, vibrating thrum that seemed to penetrate his skull. He took another step and he heard it, a faint murmur like a crowd of people talking in the next room. He stopped. "What is that sound?" "The wind," Olin said from behind him. "This chasm creates unusual acoustics. The shape of the trees, the moisture in the air. It plays tricks on the ears. Some of our more poetically inclined members say the trees themselves are speaking." Jonah listened again. It did not sound like wind. It sounded like voices, distorted, faint, but undeniably human. He felt a prickling sensation on the back of his neck. He walked faster, eager to reach the other side. The whispering seemed to follow him, rising and falling in volume with each sway of the bridge. It was unsettling. He was relieved when his feet touched the solid wood of the far platform. As they walked away from the bridge, Jonah glanced over his shoulder. He saw one of the younger members of the community, a quiet man named Reese who was often tasked with maintaining the bridges. Reese was standing near the entrance to the Whispering Bridge, his tools in hand. He was not working. He was staring at Jonah, his expression unreadable, before his gaze darted towards Olin and he quickly looked away, busying himself with checking a knot. Jonah had noticed Reese before. The man seemed to be in a constant state of quiet tension, his shoulders always hunched, his eyes always scanning his surroundings. He looked like a man who was perpetually waiting for something terrible to happen. Olin led him to a final platform. It offered a panoramic view of the entire treetop city. It was a marvel, a testament to human ingenuity and dedication. "This is what we have built," Olin said, sweeping a hand across the vista. "A world of peace, a world of balance, a world free from the chaos. You have a place here, Jonah, if you choose to accept it." Jonah looked at the sprawling community, at the tranquil gardens and the sturdy homes. He thought of Olin's simple, powerful rules. He thought of the souvenir tree, a memorial of shed lives. He thought of the unnerving whispers on the bridge. He thought of Reese's fearful glance. The society was a paradise. It was everything he had been searching for. But a new feeling, a cold and sharp-edged sliver of doubt, had taken root deep within him. Paradises were not supposed to have secrets, and Jonah was beginning to suspect this one was full of them. He stood beside the charismatic leader, nodding as if he understood, while a single, insistent thought echoed in his mind. What happens to the people who break the rules? Chapter 3: The Giving. A month bled into 2. Jonah fell into the rhythm of the society. He worked, he ate, he slept. He learned the names of the trees and the patterns of the birds. He spoke little and listened much. The community was, on its surface, a place of profound tranquility. Yet the sliver of doubt within him grew, fed by small, dissonant details. He noticed the way the older members, the ones like Mother Maeve whose skin was like dried parchment, watched the newcomers. Their gazes were placid but carried a strange, assessing quality like farmers inspecting livestock. He noticed the red tinge in their eyes, a web of tiny veins which made them appear constantly bloodshot. He saw it in Olin, too, and in Gideon, the community's silent, hulking warden. He also noticed the disappearances. They were never announced as such. They were departures. A member would decide to rejoin the world, and the community would hold a farewell ceremony. The first one Jonah witnessed was for a young woman named Elara. She had arrived a few months before him. Jonah had found her to be nervous and flighty, a temperament which seemed at odds with the community's pervading calm. Olin gathered everyone at the great hearth. Ilara stood beside him, her face pale, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. "Our sister Ilara has decided her time with us is at an end," Olin announced, his voice filled with a gentle sadness. "Her heart calls her to a different path. We do not bind anyone to our branches. We are a sanctuary, not a cage. We wish her a safe journey and a peaceful life." The community members murmured their goodbyes. They hugged her, but their embraces were brief, almost formal. No one asked where she was going or why she was leaving. Jonah watched her face. She did not look like someone embarking on a new adventure. She looked like a prisoner on her way to the gallows. Her eyes were wide with a terror so profound it seemed to have stolen her voice. She tried to smile, but it was a pathetic, trembling grimace. That night Jonah could not sleep. He sat by his window, looking out into the vast darkness. The farewell ceremony had felt wrong. It was a performance, and a poorly rehearsed one at that. He kept thinking of Ilara's eyes. A sound pulled him from his thoughts, a soft scuffing of a boot on wood. He peered out from his window, his position giving him a clear view of the main walkway leading towards the community's edge. Two figures emerged from the shadows. The first was Gideon, the warden, his massive frame unmistakable. The second, smaller figure was Ilara. She was not carrying a pack or any supplies. Gideon had a firm grip on her upper arm, his knuckles a pale contrast against the dark fabric of her sleeve. He was not escorting her, he was marching her. They did not take the main bridge which led towards the downward path. Instead, Gideon steered her towards a smaller, less used bridge Jonah had never seen anyone cross. It led to an isolated series of platforms deep in the oldest, darkest part of the forest, the part Olin had not shown him. Jonah's heart hammered against his ribs. This was not a departure. This was something else. He had to follow, he had to see. He slipped out of his dwelling, his bare feet making no sound on the wooden platform. He kept to the shadows, moving with a caution he didn't know he possessed. The air was cold and the night was moonless. He used his memory of the society's layout to navigate, his path a complicated dance from one patch of darkness to the next. He reached the head of the forbidden bridge. It was old and it creaked ominously under his weight. He could see the faint light of a single lantern far ahead, where Gideon was leading Ilara. He followed at a distance, his senses screaming. The low hum of the wind was louder here, the air thick with the smell of decay and damp earth. The trees were ancient behemoths, their branches so thick they blotted out the stars completely. He felt a primal fear, the kind his ancestors must have known, a fear of the deep, dark woods and what they contained. The lantern ahead came to a stop on a large, circular platform built around a colossal redwood. Jonah ducked behind the trunk of a smaller tree just off the bridge, his hiding spot affording him a partial view. He saw other figures waiting on the platform. Olin was there, and Mother Maeve, and a handful of the other elders, their eyes glinting in the lantern light. Ilara was struggling now, her terror finally breaking through her paralysis. She tried to pull away from Gideon, a small, choked sob escaping her lips. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I won't tell anyone, I'll stay. I'll be quiet, please." Olin stepped forward. He did not look like a gentle spiritual leader now. His face was a mask of cold, serene purpose. He reached out and stroked Alara's hair, a gesture which would have been comforting from anyone else. From him, it was terrifying. "Hush, little bird," Olin said, his voice soft, yet carrying an unmistakable edge of command. "Your fear is a beautiful gift. The great root savors it. You should be honored. You are giving back to the whole. You are becoming a part of something eternal." Gideon forced Alara to her knees in the center of the platform. Jonah's mind reeled. The great root, giving back to the whole. This was a ritual. This was a sacrifice. The truth of the community, the awful, monstrous secret at its heart, slammed into him with the force of a physical blow. Mother Maeve began to hum. It was the same unsettling tune he had heard her hum before, but now it was filled with a chilling reverence. As she hummed, a strange, sweet scent filled the air. Jonah saw one of the elders holding a single, pale white flower, its petals shaped like a gaping mouth. A pale grinner. He held it close to Alara's face. Her struggles ceased. Her body went limp, her eyes glazing over with a paralytic calm. Then a sound came from above. A dry, rustling sound, like a massive snake slithering down a bark-covered wall. Jonah pressed himself tighter against the tree, his breath caught in his throat. He tilted his head upwards, his eyes straining in the gloom. Something was descending the trunk of the massive redwood. It was long and dark, the same shape he had seen on his first night. It was not cloth. It was not equipment. It moved with a slow, deliberate purpose. A bark draper. It hung from the tree, its form almost indistinguishable from the bark around it, a masterpiece of natural camouflage. It was directly above the platform, directly above the kneeling, paralyzed form of Alara. The cultists watched, their faces upturned, their expressions a mixture of awe and reverence. Olin's face was ecstatic. Jonah could not watch, but he could not look away. He was frozen, a prisoner of his own discovery. He saw the creature drop. It did not fall with a thud. It descended in a controlled, silent glide, unfurling like a macabre banner in the night. It landed on Alara, covering her completely. Her body convulsed once beneath the dark shape, a single, muffled sound escaping her lips. And then there was only the sound of the wind, the humming of Mother Maeve, and a soft, wet, absorbing noise which made Jonah's stomach clench. He had to get out. He had to run. He took a single, shuffling step backward. His foot came down on a dry twig which had fallen onto the rope bridge. Crack! The sound was impossibly loud in the dead quiet of the forest. Every head on the platform snapped in his direction. Olin's ecstatic expression vanished, replaced by a look of pure, cold fury. Gideon's eyes narrowed, his hand already moving to the large knife at his belt. The humming stopped. The wet, absorbing sound stopped. And the thing on the ground, the bark draper, began to shift. The top portion of its form, which Jonah had assumed was some kind of hood, lifted. It was not a hood. It was a head. Flat, featureless, and covered in the same bark-like hide as the rest of its body. It turned slowly, uncannily, towards the source of the sound, towards Jonah's hiding place. He was seen. He was discovered. The sanctuary was a cage, the paradise was a farm, and the harvest had begun. Chapter 4. The Bridge and the Warning. Panic was a physical thing. It clawed up Jonah's throat, hot and acidic. His mind, the logical, ordered mind of a programmer, fractured into 1,000 screaming error messages. Run, hide, escape. The commands were useless. His legs were locked, his body refusing to obey. On the platform, Gideon took a heavy step toward the bridge, his silhouette a promise of brutal violence. Olin raised a single hand, stopping him. The leader's cold gaze remained fixed on the spot where Jonah was hiding. Then Olin did something unexpected. He smiled. It was not his serene, welcoming smile. It was a thin, predatory curl of the lips. "It seems we have another guest for the ceremony," he said, his voice carrying easily across the distance. "Curiosity is a powerful appetite. Let us invite him to the feast." That broke the spell. The image of Ilara, the sound of absorption, the sight of the featureless head turning toward him, it all coalesced into a surge of pure adrenaline. Jonah turned and scrambled away, his bare feet slapping against the wooden planks of the bridge. He did not dare look over his shoulder. He could hear the heavy, pounding footsteps of Gideon starting across the bridge behind him, the whole structure groaning under the warden's weight. He ran with a desperation he had never known. The darkness of the canopy, once a symbol of peace, was now his only ally. He ducked off the main walkways, plunging into the lesser-known paths, the maintenance routes he'd seen the quieter members use. He could hear Gideon shouting, the sound muffled by the dense foliage. Other voices joined in. They were not panicked. They were organized. The sounds of a hunt. He found a thick growth of hanging moss and vines near a junction and squeezed himself into it, pressing his body flat against the trunk of a redwood. He held his breath, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. A few moments later, two cultists ran past his hiding spot, their feet pounding the wood, their lantern beams cutting sharp, frantic arcs through the darkness. They did not see him. He waited, counting the seconds, which stretched into minutes. The shouting grew more distant. They were spreading out, sweeping the area. This was their world. They knew every bridge, every ladder, every hiding place. He was an intruder in their web. His time was limited. He needed help. He needed an ally. A single face appeared in his mind, Reese. The quiet, conflicted bridge builder, the man with the fearful eyes. Reese was his only chance. Jonah moved again, a ghost in the treetop city. He avoided the main paths, sticking to the shadows, his senses stretched to their breaking point. Every creak of wood, every gust of wind, sent a fresh spike of fear through him. He finally made it to the residential section. He located the small dwelling he knew belonged to Reese. No light came from within. He tapped on the door, the sound barely audible. No response. He tapped again, harder. "Reese," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "It's Jonah. I need your help. I saw it. I saw what they did to Ilara." The door opened a crack. Reese's pale, terrified face appeared in the sliver of darkness. "Go away," he hissed. "They'll see you. You'll bring them here." "They're already looking for me," Jonah pressed, his voice urgent. "You know this is wrong, Reese. I saw it in your face. You've been watching me, you know." Reese looked past him, his eyes darting into the shadows. "You don't understand what you've seen. You can't fight it." "Help me," Jonah pleaded. "Help me understand. Help me get out of here. Your parents, your grandparents, were they all a part of this?" Reese flinched, the question hitting a nerve. "The first ones. They made a choice," he stammered. "A pact for long life, for safety from the world below." "What life?" Jonah countered, his voice low and intense. "Living in fear, sacrificing innocent people. That isn't life, it's a curse. That thing, the hunger they called it, it doesn't give life. It just delays death." Reese opened the door wider and pulled Jonah inside, slamming it shut behind him. The dwelling was sparse, smelling of wood shavings and rope tar. "You are a dead man," Reese said, his voice trembling. "They will hunt you until they find you. And when they do, they will give you to the silent hunger." "What is it?" Jonah demanded. "That creature, the bark draper, is that it?" "No," Reese shook his head, running a hand through his messy hair. "The bark draper is just a hand, a tool. The silent hunger is everything, the roots, the wood, the soil we are never allowed to touch. It's the whole forest, it's sentient, and it's always hungry. The pact was simple. It allows the community to live here in its branches, and in exchange we feed it. We bring it outsiders, their life, their memories, their fear. It's like a delicacy." The scale of the horror was unimaginable. They were living on the back of a predator. "The long life?" Jonah asked. "The red sap," Reese said, his eyes wide. "From the heartwood, a gift for service, but it comes with a price. It binds you to this place. It slowly erases who you were. You become hollow." He gestured vaguely, as if indicating the elders. "You just exist to serve the hunger." A shout echoed from nearby. A lantern beam swept past Reese's window. "They're getting closer," Reese whispered, his face ashen. "You have to hide." "Where? They know everything up here." Reese hesitated, his internal conflict warring on his face. He looked at Jonah's desperate expression, and a flicker of resolve seemed to harden his features. "There is one place they might not look right away. It's dangerous, forbidden." He pointed towards the floor. "Down." Olin said, "No, one touches the ground." "Olin is a liar. He touches the ground when he needs to bury his mistakes," Reese said, his voice bitter. He moved to a corner of the room and pulled away a bearskin rug, revealing a well-hidden trapdoor. "There's a system of old ladders inside the trunk, maintenance shafts. They go all the way down. Be careful. Some of the rungs are rotten." Jonah looked at the trapdoor, then back at Reese. "Why are you helping me?" Reese would not meet his eye. "My younger sister. She was chosen for the giving 5 years ago. Olin said she was special, that the hunger wanted her. He said it was an honor." For the first time, a spark of hatred burned in Reese's fearful eyes. "I want to see Olin's paradise burn." Another shout, much closer this time. Gideon's voice. "Check the dwellings, search them all." "Go," Reese urged, lifting the trapdoor. A wave of cool, earthy air washed over them. "Follow the ladder down. At the bottom there is only one tunnel. It will take you away from the main grove. Wait for me there. I will try to create a diversion. I will come when it is safe." Jonah nodded, a silent bond of desperation passing between them. He swung his legs into the opening. The inside of the tree was dark and smelled of rot. He found the first rung of a crude wooden ladder. It felt slick with moisture. "Reese," Jonah said, pausing one last time. "What's in the tunnel? What's on the ground?" Reese looked at him, his face a mask of dread. "Worse things than the bark draper," he said. "The hunger doesn't like things living on its skin. Now go." Jonah began his descent, leaving the relative safety of Reese's home for a new, unknown darkness. Above him, he heard the trapdoor close, followed moments later by the heavy, splintering crash of Reese's main door being kicked in. The hunt had arrived. Jonah was no longer in the web. He was falling through a crack in the world, into the domain of the monster itself. Chapter 5: The Skin of the God. The descent was an eternity of darkness and decay. The air grew thick and heavy, saturated with the smell of wet soil, rotting wood, and something else, a faint metallic tang like old blood. The latter was treacherous. More than once, a rung crumbled under Jonah's weight and he was forced to cling to the sides, his fingers screaming in protest until he could find a secure footing. He moved slowly, methodically, his programmer's mind focusing on the immediate problem, next rung, next handhold. To think about the drop below or the hunt above was to invite a fatal mistake. He did not know how far he went. Hundreds of feet, perhaps more. The sounds of the treetop world faded, replaced by a profound, subterranean silence. There was no wind here, only the drip, drip, drip of water seeping through the ancient wood and the frantic pounding of his own heart. Finally, his foot met something solid, not a rung but earth. He had reached the bottom. He let go of the ladder and stood in absolute blackness. He took a cautious step, his hands outstretched. The floor was soft, yielding, a mixture of dirt and decomposing leaves. He was inside the base of the redwood. He was on the ground. Olin's great taboo broken. He waited for his eyes to adjust, but there was no light to adjust to. This was a primal darkness, untouched by sun or star. He remembered Reese's words, "There is only one tunnel." He began to shuffle forward, his hands tracing the curved, rough wall of the tree's interior. He moved in a slow circle, his boots sinking slightly into the mulch. His hand found an opening, a space where the wall gave way to empty air, the entrance to the tunnel. The air flowing from the tunnel was colder and it carried the metallic scent more strongly. He hesitated, worse things than the bark draper, but Gideon was above. Olin was above. He had no choice. He stepped into the tunnel. The passage was narrow, the walls earthen and held in place by a thick, gnarled network of roots which snaked through the soil like fossilized veins. He had to crouch to move forward. It felt less like a tunnel and more like a burrow dug by some enormous animal. He moved by touch alone, his fingers brushing against the damp, cold roots. He had been moving for what felt like an hour when he saw it, a faint, pale glow from up ahead. Hope surged through him. An exit, light. He moved faster, stumbling through the oppressive darkness toward the luminescence. As he drew closer, he realized it was not sunlight. It was a soft, ghostly, blue-green light, pulsing with a slow, rhythmic beat like a slumbering heart. The tunnel opened into a vast cavern. Jonah stopped at the edge, his mind struggling to comprehend the scene before him. He was not in a simple cave. He was in the heart of the root system. The cavern was immense, and it was alive with the pulsing light of the whisper mycelium. The glow emanated from thick, fungal cords which ran along the floor, up the walls, and across the ceiling, weaving through a colossal tangle of redwood roots. The roots themselves were the size of pythons, of cars, of small buildings, twisting together in an impossible, organic architecture. In the center of the cavern, the roots coalesced into a single massive nexus, a knotted bundle of living wood which pulsed with a stronger, deeper light. This was it, the heartwood, the brain of the silent hunger. The sight was both beautiful and profoundly terrifying. He was not under the forest. He was inside the body of a god, a hungry, malevolent god. The ground was littered with bones. Not animal bones, they were human. Skulls, ribs, and femurs lay half buried in the soil, covered in glowing moss. And among the bones were other things, the items from the souvenir tree, a rusted watch, a mud-caked doll, a wallet, its leather warped and decayed, spilling out the phantom shapes of credit cards. This was the entity's larder, its trophy room. A sound made him freeze, a wet, tearing noise from the far side of the chamber. Jonah flattened himself behind a thick root, peering into the glowing cavern. He saw movement. It was not a bark draper. It was something else, something low to the ground with too many legs. It looked like a turtle, but a turtle the size of a large dog, its shell a jagged dome of hardened mud and rock. It was a root snapper. Its head was a brutish, beaked thing on a thick, wrinkled neck. It was tearing at a fresh corpse, its powerful beak cracking through bone with sickening ease. The corpse was dressed in the simple, homespun clothes of the Ethelberg society. It was one of Olin's mistakes. Someone who had fallen or been exiled and left for the horrors of the forest floor. Jonah felt a wave of nausea. He pressed a hand to his mouth, stifling a gag. The sound he made was tiny, but in the vast, silent chamber it was enough. The root snapper's head shot up. Its eyes were small, black, and devoid of anything but primal hunger. It swiveled its head, its beak snapping, and began to move toward his hiding place. It was slow, but it was relentless. Jonah backed away, deeper into the tunnel he had come from. The creature followed, its heavy shell scraping against the narrow passage walls. He could not outrun it in the tight space. He was trapped. He scrambled backwards, his hands searching for a weapon, a rock, anything. His fingers closed around a large, heavy bone, a human femur. He gripped it tightly, his knuckles white. The creature was only feet away, its beak opening and closing, a low hiss issuing from its throat. Suddenly, a different sound came from behind the creature, from the direction of the cavern. A soft thud and then another. The root snapper stopped. It turned its head, its attention diverted. A figure stood at the mouth of the tunnel. It was Reese. He held a small, sharpened hand axe and in his other hand a lantern. "I told you I would come," Reese said, his voice tight with fear. The root snapper hissed again and turned its full attention to the newcomer, to the light. It lumbered towards Reese, seeing a more immediate threat. "Reese, get back," Jonah yelled. But Reese stood his ground. He waited until the creature was almost upon him, its beak lunging forward. Then he moved with a speed Jonah would not have thought possible. He sidestepped the attack and swung the hand axe in a powerful, downward arc. The blade struck the creature's extended neck with a wet, solid thump. The root snapper convulsed, its legs twitching, and then lay still. Reese stood over the dead creature, breathing heavily, his face pale in the lantern light. "We have to move," he said, not looking at Jonah. "They know I helped you. They'll send Gideon down here, or worse. Worse? Jonah asked, getting to his feet, his own legs shaking. Olin doesn't like his secrets getting out, Reese said, his eyes scanning the cavern nervously. The things that live on the ground are bad, but the thing he sends to clean up messes is the sap Goliath. As if summoned by his words, a low, deep groan echoed through the cavern. It was not the sound of an animal. It was the sound of immense weight shifting, of ancient wood groaning under strain. The light from the heartwood pulsed faster, brighter. From the far side of the chamber, one of the largest roots began to move. It shuddered, sap the color of dark amber weeping from cracks in its surface. The sap hardened, glowing with a malevolent inner light. Other roots were drawn to it, weaving themselves into a new shape. Bones were pulled from the soil, incorporated into the growing form. A figure was rising from the floor. A massive, humanoid shape made of wood, bone, and glowing, hardened sap. A sap Goliath. It had no face, but Jonah felt its attention lock onto them. A palpable wave of ancient, remorseless hatred. Reese grabbed Jonah's arm. "Run," he said, his voice a choked whisper. "Now." Chapter 6. The Gnawing Roots. The sap Goliath was a blasphemy of nature. It was not born, it was assembled. Jonah watched, mesmerized by the sheer wrongness of it, as more roots, slick with glowing amber, were drawn into its form. The bones of past victims formed a skeletal cage within its translucent, wooden flesh. The low groan it emitted was the sound of the forest's deepest structures being bent to a single, hateful purpose. It was still growing, still pulling itself together, but its massive head, a featureless block of hardened sap with two glowing points of light for eyes, was already fixed on them. "Run," Reese said again, his voice cracking the spell of horror. He shoved Jonah toward the dark maw of the tunnel they had just exited. "This way, there's another passage. Move." Jonah's legs finally obeyed. He scrambled back into the burrow, the femur he had grabbed as a weapon falling from his numb fingers. Reese was right behind him, his lantern casting their shadows long and distorted against the earthen walls. The Goliath took a thunderous, dragging step, the sound of 1,000 trees groaning in unison. The entire cavern shook, and dust rained down from the ceiling. "It's slow," Jonah yelled over the noise, his voice tight with a hope he did not feel. "It won't be," Reese shouted back. "It's part of this place. It can move through the roots." They ran. The tunnel was a claustrophobic nightmare. Gnarled roots protruded from the walls and floor, catching at their clothes, threatening to trip them with every frantic step. Reese's lantern beam danced wildly, illuminating brief, terrifying vignettes of the passage ahead. Behind them, the grinding, groaning sound of the Goliath grew louder, closer. It was not just behind them, it was around them. The roots in the walls began to tremble, and a low, resonant vibration pulsed through the very ground they ran on. Jonah risked a glance back. The entrance to the tunnel was no longer dark. It was filled with a pulsing, amber light. The Goliath was not trying to squeeze its massive frame into the burrow. It was collapsing the entrance, its form melting and reshaping to pour into the tunnel like a viscous, unstoppable tide. "It's blocking the way," Jonah gasped. "Keep going," Reese urged, his breath coming in ragged bursts. "There's a fissure up ahead, a place the big roots don't grow." The vibration in the walls intensified. Jonah felt something brush against his ankle. He stumbled, crying out, and kicked his leg free. He looked down. Small, pale shapes like overgrown woodlice were emerging from cracks in the roots. They were the size of his thumb, with chittering mandibles and too many legs. Root gnawers. One had latched onto his boot, its jaws already chewing through the thick leather. He kicked it against the wall, where it splattered with a faint, bioluminescent pop. The walls were coming alive. More of the creatures were pouring out, attracted by the vibration, the scent of living things. They swarmed over the floor, a pale, skittering carpet of hunger. "Don't let them touch your skin," Reese yelled. The tunnel ahead forked. Reese did not hesitate, veering into the narrower of the two passages. The floor here was rockier, with fewer of the massive roots. The swarm of gnawers seemed to thin, preferring the larger, living wood. But the grinding sound of the Goliath was still right behind them, a sound that promised a crushing, grinding end. The passage narrowed further. Jonah had to turn sideways to squeeze through. He felt a sharp, searing pain in his calf. One of the gnawers had found its way up his pant leg. He slapped at it through the cloth, crushing it, but its mandibles had already done their work. He pushed the pain away. There was no time for it. "Here," Reese's voice was a strained gasp. Jonah squeezed through the final, narrow section and tumbled out into a small, dark space. It was not a cavern, more like a small pocket in the earth, a fissure between massive, ancient rock formations. Reese was already there, his back pressed against the stone. The only entrance was the one they had just come through. "Is this it?" Jonah asked, his body screaming with exhaustion and pain. "Is this the hiding place?" "It has to be," Reese said. "The main roots don't grow through this rock. It can't follow us in here." As he spoke, the amber light filled the narrow passage they had just exited. The grinding sound stopped directly outside their sanctuary. Then came a new sound, a wet, percussive tapping against the stone. The Goliath was probing the entrance, its sappy, semi-liquid form unable to push through the solid rock. A thick, glowing tendril of sap snaked into the fissure, reaching for them. It was followed by another. Jonah and Reese scrambled to the back of the small cave. The tendrils stretched, writhing in the air, coming within inches of their faces before they seemed to lose cohesion, dripping to the stone floor in harmless, cooling puddles. The creature was a part of the root system. Where the roots could not go, its influence waned. The probing stopped. The light outside dimmed but did not vanish. The grinding sound was replaced by a low, patient hum. It was not leaving, it was waiting. Silence descended, broken only by their own ragged breathing. They were safe for now, but they were trapped, entombed alive, with the forest's anger given physical form standing guard just outside their door. Jonah slumped against the cold stone wall, his adrenaline-fueled strength deserting him. He looked down at his leg. He pulled up his pant leg, his stomach turning at the sight. The bite was small but deep, a nasty-looking puncture surrounded by an angry red welt. It was already beginning to swell. Reese tore a strip of cloth from the bottom of his shirt. "Here," he said, his voice quiet. "We need to clean it. Who knows what filth those things carry?" Jonah took the cloth, his hands shaking. As he pressed it against the wound, he looked at Reese in the dim, reflected glow from the cave entrance. The younger man's face was a mask of grim resolve, but his eyes still held the familiar glint of terror. "You said you wanted to see this place burn," Jonah said, his voice barely a whisper. "You weren't just talking about escaping, were you? You have a plan." Reese stared at the entrance, at the faint amber light which pulsed with the breathing of the monster outside. "A plan," he repeated, a bitter, humorless laugh escaping his lips. "No, not a plan, more like a suicide note. I stole a chemical catalyst from the workshop, the one they use to make a powerful wood preservative. If I can get it to the heartwood into the central nexus, it should cause a chain reaction, a fire that burns from the inside out, a rot that can't be stopped." He finally looked at Jonah, his eyes burning with a feverish intensity. "I can't just run, Jonah. I have to kill this thing, for my sister, for everyone it has consumed. I have to poison its heart." The confession hung in the cold, dead air of the fissure. Outside, the Goliath waited. Above, the cultists hunted. And below, in the very core of this nightmare, lay Reese's desperate, impossible target. Jonah looked at his own wounded leg, at the darkness surrounding them, and understood that escape was no longer the primary objective. His survival was now inextricably linked to Reese's revenge. Chapter 7: The Hollowed Ones. Time lost its meaning in the dark fissure. Hours crawled by, marked only by the shifting intensity of the amber glow from the entrance. The sap Goliath was relentlessly patient, a silent, luminous sentinel. The low hum of its presence was a constant pressure against their minds. Jonah's leg throbbed with a dull, persistent fire. Reese cleaned the wound as best he could with water from his canteen, his touch surprisingly gentle. "We can't wait here forever," Jonah finally said, breaking the long silence. "It won't get tired, it won't get bored. What's our move?" Reese was staring at the wall, his gaze distant. "The Goliath is a part of the main root system, a direct manifestation. It's powerful, but it's bound by the living wood. It can't go where the hunger's influence is weak." "Weak, the whole forest is alive with it." "Not all of it," Reese said, turning to face him. "Decades ago there was a fire, a lightning strike. It burned a whole section of the grove deep down. The fire scorched the roots. The hunger pulled back from that area, abandoned it. The cultists consider it blighted ground, taboo. They never go there. There are old burrows, passages through the dead roots. If we can get to them, we might be able to circle around this thing." It was a long shot, but it was better than waiting to starve. "How do we get there?" Jonah asked. Reese pointed to the back of the fissure. "This crack in the rock. I think it goes deeper. I used to explore down here when I was a kid, before I understood what I was living with. I was always looking for a way out." His voice was heavy with the memory. They used the lantern sparingly, conserving its fuel. The fissure did indeed narrow into a tight crack at the back of the cave. It was a miserable squeeze, their clothes tearing on sharp-edged rock, but it opened up into another series of tunnels. The transition was immediate and stark. One moment they were in the warm, damp, living part of the earth, surrounded by the faint glow of the mycelium. The next, they were in a place that felt utterly dead. The air here was cold and stagnant, holding a dry, dusty scent of ancient ash. The walls were not soil held by living roots, but a brittle, tangled mass of blackened, petrified wood. There was no glow, no sound, no vibration. The oppressive presence of the silent hunger was gone, and its absence was just as unnerving. It felt like they were walking through the skeletal remains of a great beast. The darkness was absolute. Reese's lantern was their only point of reference in a void that seemed to swallow the light. They moved for what could have been hours, their footsteps echoing strangely in the dead silence. "How much farther?" Jonah whispered, the sound unnaturally loud. "I don't know," Reese admitted. "These tunnels, they don't feel right. They might have shifted since I was last here." They rounded a bend and the tunnel opened up. Jonah's breath caught in his throat. In the center of a small chamber stood a figure, its back to them. It was a person, dressed in the simple garb of the society. "Get back," Reese hissed, pulling Jonah behind a column of charred wood. He extinguished the lantern, plunging them into total darkness. "Who is that?" Jonah mouthed, his voice a thread of sound. "I don't know. No one should be down here." They waited. The figure did not move. After a long, tense minute, Reese cautiously relit the lantern, keeping the flame low. The figure was still there, motionless. Its clothes were tattered and stained with soil. "Hello," Reese called out, his voice trembling slightly. The figure did not respond. Reese took a hesitant step forward, raising the lantern. The light fell upon the person's face. It was a man, elderly, with a long, white beard. His eyes were open, but they were milky and unfocused. A placid, content smile was fixed on his face. He was one of them. One of the elders Jonah had seen at the great hearth. One of the hallowed ones. "He's empty," Jonah breathed. "They move them sometimes," Reese whispered, a new kind of fear in his voice. "When they become too vacant even for the society, they bring them down here, a different kind of garbage disposal." As Reese spoke, a low moan came from a dark passage to their left. Another figure shuffled into view. An old woman, her face also bearing that same serene, empty smile. She moved with a slow, shambling gait. Then another appeared from a passage on the right. They were not alone in the dead zone. This was where the cult's oldest members were left to rot. The first man, the one with the beard, slowly turned his head. The movement was stiff, unnatural, like a statue coming to life. His vacant eyes fixed on them. The smile never left his face. He opened his mouth, but it was not his own voice that emerged. It was a chorus of whispers. Faint, terrified, overlapping voices, a cacophony of stolen last thoughts. The sound of the whisper mycelium channeled through this empty human vessel. "Help me. It's so dark. Please, no, let me go." The sound was an alarm, a psychic scream that echoed through the dead tunnels. The other hollowed ones turned their heads in unison. Their smiles widened. They began to shuffle forward, their movements slow but inexorable, their combined whispers a tidal wave of psychic anguish that clawed at Jonah's sanity. They had escaped the living monster only to find themselves in a pen with the living dead. The blighted ground was not empty. It was a kennel, and the alarm had just been raised. Chapter 8: The Red Sap. The advance of the hollowed ones was a slow-motion nightmare. They did not run or scream. They simply walked, their placid smiles a terrifying counterpoint to the chorus of stolen fear pouring from their mouths. The psychic pressure was immense, a wave of pure despair that made Jonah's head swim and his knees weak. "We have to go through them," Reese yelled, snapping Jonah out of his stupor. He hefted his small axe. "Don't let them touch you." He charged not at the shambling elders but at the wall of brittle, charred roots beside them. The axe bit deep, and a section of the dead wood shattered, opening a narrow gap into an adjacent tunnel. "This way." Jonah followed, pushing past one of the smiling women. Her hand brushed his arm. The touch was cold, but it sent a jolt through him, a flash of alien memory, the feeling of falling from a great height. He recoiled, stumbling through the opening Reese had made. They were in another tunnel, but they could hear the shuffling footsteps of the hollowed ones following, their whispers echoing from all directions. They were being herded. Suddenly, a bright, focused beam of light cut through the darkness from ahead. A voice, cold and familiar, boomed through the passage. "The runaways are cornered. Bring them down." It was Gideon. He stood at a tunnel intersection, flanked by 4 grim-faced cultists armed with sturdy wooden staves. The hunt from above had converged with the horror from below. The hollowed ones shuffled in from behind, sealing their retreat. The hunters advanced from the front, their faces set with zealous fury. They were trapped. "Jonah!" Reese shouted. He pulled a small, heavy, canvas-wrapped package from inside his jacket. He shoved it into Jonah's hands. It felt like it was filled with a dense, clay-like substance. "This is the catalyst, the heartwood. You saw it. You know where it is." "Reese, what are you doing?" "A diversion," Reese yelled. He turned not towards Gideon but back towards the whispering, smiling elders. With a raw, guttural scream of pure rage, he charged directly into them. "For my sister, you empty bastards!" His sudden, violent attack took the hollowed ones by surprise. He swung his axe not to kill, but to shove and create chaos. The placid expressions of the elders broke for a single, horrifying moment as he crashed into them, their whispers turning into a discordant shriek. The hunters, including Gideon, were momentarily stunned by the sheer ferocity of Reese's suicidal charge. That was the opening Jonah needed. He scrambled up a pile of rubble and squeezed into a different, smaller tunnel, the one Gideon's party had emerged from. He could hear Gideon roaring in frustration, ordering his men to split up. Jonah ran, alone now, the weight of the catalyst in his hands a terrible responsibility. He was no warrior. He was a coder, a man of logic. He had to think, not fight. He focused on the memory of the tunnels, the path back to the great cavern, back to the heartwood. His flight became a desperate game of cat and mouse. He could hear the hunters behind him, their calls echoing through the passages. He used the terrain, ducking into crevices, doubling back when he could. He was moving through the living part of the root system again, the faint blue-green glow of the mycelium providing just enough light to navigate. He stumbled out of a tunnel and found himself in a place he had not seen before. It was a smaller cavern, a kind of natural basin in the earth. Here, one of the colossal redwood roots broke through the surface, a thick, pulsing artery of wood. There was a deep wound in it, a gash from which a thick, dark red liquid oozed, pooling on the cavern floor. the red sap. Cultists were here, not hunters, 3 of them, their backs to Jonah. They were tending to the pool, their movements slow and ritualistic. One of them knelt, cupped his hands in the viscous liquid, and drank deeply. As the man stood, Jonah saw his face. His eyes were completely red, the color of blood. His skin was pale and waxy. He was in the final stages of the transformation. This was the source of their longevity. This was the price. A slow petrification of the soul. Jonah watched in horror as another one of the tenders, a woman, stood utterly still, her arm outstretched towards the pool. Her skin was hardening, taking on the texture of bark. She was becoming a living statue, another forgotten sacrifice to keep the cult's engine running. He backed away, trying to retreat into the tunnel, but his foot snapped a dry, glowing piece of fungus. The sound, a sharp crack, echoed in the quiet chamber. The 3 cultists turned. Their movements were sluggish, but their red eyes fixed on him with an unnerving intensity. Before they could react, however, a massive shape blocked the tunnel entrance Jonah was aiming for. Gideon stood there, his face smeared with dirt, his expression one of triumphant rage. "Nowhere left to run, outsider," he snarled. Jonah was trapped between the vacant-eyed tenders and the furious warden. Gideon advanced on him, drawing his long knife. Jonah backed away, his eyes darting around for an escape. His back hit the edge of the sap pool. Gideon lunged. Jonah, acting on pure instinct, threw the heavy catalyst package at the warden's face. Gideon swatted it away with a forearm, but the impact broke his momentum for a split second. It was not enough. Gideon grabbed the front of Jonah's shirt, lifting him off his feet, the point of the knife pressing against his throat. "I am going to enjoy carving the fear out of you for the great root," Gideon hissed, his face inches from Jonah's. A scream of pure fury erupted from the tunnel behind Gideon. A bloodied, battered figure hurtled out of the darkness and slammed into the warden's back. It was Reese. He was alive, but barely. One arm hung uselessly at his side, and a deep gash ran across his forehead, blood pouring down his face. The impact sent both men staggering forward. Gideon lost his grip on Jonah. They tumbled together, a tangle of limbs, to the very edge of the viscous pool of red sap. Gideon, larger and stronger, rolled on top, raising his knife to plunge it into Reese's chest. With his last ounce of strength, Reese wrapped his legs around the warden and heaved. They fell together with a great, thick splash into the deep pool of sap. Gideon's face was a mask of shock and fury as the thick, dark red liquid closed over his head. Reese did not struggle. He simply sank, his eyes locking with Jonah's for one final moment. In them, Jonah saw not fear but a quiet, terrible peace. The pool swirled, a few large bubbles rose to the surface, and then it was still. Jonah stood, panting, his body shaking uncontrollably. The other cultists in the chamber watched, their expressions as blank and incurious as cows watching a storm. He looked at the still pool, then at the catalyst package lying on the ground. Gideon was gone. Reese was gone. The path to the Heartwood was clear. The suicide note had been passed to him. Chapter 9. The Heartwood Chamber. The silence left behind by the violence was a heavy, suffocating thing. Jonah stood in the cavern, the air thick with the cloying, metallic sweet scent of the red sap. The pool was a placid crimson mirror, showing no sign of the two bodies it had consumed. The three tenders, the guardians of this profane font, remained where they were, their red eyes fixed on him. But there was no malice in their gaze, no intent. They were simply watchers, their minds long ago scoured clean and offered up as tribute. They were no more a threat than the rocks they stood on. Jonah's whole body trembled with the aftershock of adrenaline. Reese was gone. Gideon was gone. The thought should have brought relief, but it only brought a deeper, colder dread. He was alone. The catalyst package lying on the damp earth felt impossibly heavy. It was a dying man's last wish, a mission Jonah had never asked for. He bent down and picked it up. The canvas was damp, slightly sticky. He had to move. He could not wait for another hunting party. He looked at the tunnels leading out of the cavern. Which one led back to the heartwood? He had been running, disoriented, following Reese. His internal map was a chaotic mess. He chose a tunnel, the one Gideon had not emerged from, and stepped into the darkness. The familiar blue-green glow of the whisper mycelium returned, painting the gnarled roots in ghostly light. He moved cautiously, every sense on high alert. The silence was his enemy now. It gave his mind too much room to work, to replay the image of Reese sinking into the red pool, of Ilara being absorbed by the bark draper. The whispers started again, faint at first like the sigh of a distant wind. He tried to ignore them, focusing on the path ahead, but they grew louder, more insistent. They were not just random sounds anymore. They were targeted. A voice, sharp and critical, echoed in his head. "You were always a failure, Jonah. You ran from your job. You ran from your life. Now you are running in the dark. You will fail this too." It was the voice of his former boss, a man he had despised. Jonah shook his head, pressing onward. The voice faded, replaced by another. "Why didn't you call? I waited. You never called." A woman he had dated years ago, a relationship he had allowed to wither through his own neglect. The whisper mycelium was not just broadcasting random thoughts. It was a psychic predator. It was sifting through his memories, finding his deepest regrets, his most profound insecurities, and weaponizing them against him. It was the hunger's immune system, attacking any foreign consciousness that drew too close to its heart. He stumbled, his injured leg sending a fresh spear of pain up his side. He leaned against a root, gasping. The whispers intensified, swirling around him, a vortex of his own past failures. "He's not strong enough," the voices murmured. "Reese made a mistake. He chose a coward." "Shut up," Jonah hissed into the darkness, his own voice sounding thin and weak. The mycelium seemed to feed on his reaction. The glow on the walls pulsed brighter. A new voice emerged from the cacophony, a voice that cut deeper than all the others. "Are you lost, son? Just stay put. I'll come find you." It was his father who had died from a heart attack 10 years ago. The voice was perfect, filled with the same gentle, reassuring warmth he remembered. Jonah froze. He knew it was a trick, a psychic illusion woven from his own grief, but it was so real. "I'm right around the next bend, Jonah. Just come here. We can figure this out together." He felt a powerful, irrational urge to follow the voice, to seek its source. A part of him, the grieving child that never truly goes away, wanted to believe it. He took a step forward. Then he remembered Reese's face, the quiet peace in his eyes as he sank into the sap. He remembered the promise. Reese had not died so Jonah could chase ghosts in the dark. "You are not him," Jonah said, his voice stronger now, harder. He pushed himself off the root and forced his legs to move, walking away from the phantom voice. "You are just a parasite." The whispers recoiled, turning into a frustrated, static hiss. Jonah had found the key. The mycelium fed on engagement, on fear and regret. By denying it, he starved it. He focused his mind on a single, cold, logical thought: the catalyst, the heartwood, the mission. He turned his mind into a fortress, building walls of pure, dispassionate code around his memories. He walked for what felt like another hour, ignoring the phantom sounds and fleeting images that flickered at the edge of his vision. He navigated by instinct, by a faint sense of familiarity in the twist of the roots. Then he saw it. The passage opened up, and the familiar, vast, glowing cavern of the heartwood spread out before him. It was just as he remembered it, a cathedral of living wood and pale, pulsing light. The bones of the dead were a silent congregation on the floor. In the center, the great nexus of roots, the heartwood itself, pulsed with a slow, arrogant power. It was the source of the whispers. It was the brain of the forest. The air hummed with its ancient, alien consciousness. He stepped into the cavern, the catalyst package held tight in his hands. He felt like a single bacterium entering the body of a leviathan, an insignificant intruder about to commit an act of cosmic sabotage. He started walking toward the center, his boots crunching softly on the bone-littered soil. The whispers rose to a deafening crescendo, 1,000 voices screaming at him to turn back. He gritted his teeth, his mental walls holding against the psychic onslaught. He was halfway to the nexus when a calm, familiar voice cut through the chaos. "I must admit, I am impressed. I truly did not think you had it in you." Jonah stopped. He looked toward the base of the heartwood. A figure stepped out from behind the massive, central root. It was Olin Fallow. He was not angry. He was not panicked. He stood there, his hands clasped behind his back, with the serene, patient air of a gardener who had just discovered a particularly stubborn weed in his prize-winning patch. "You have seen our secrets," Olin said, his voice soft but echoing in the vast chamber. "You have trespassed in our holiest of sanctums, and you have murdered my most loyal son. You have been very busy." "Gideon made his own choices," Jonah said, his voice steady despite the hammering in his chest. "Just like you did, just like all of you did. You chose to feed a monster." Olin smiled, a gentle, pitying expression. "Monster? You use such a limited vocabulary. You see a predator. I see a symbiotic relationship. You see death. I see a transfer of energy. We give the great root the fleeting, chaotic lives of a few, and in return it gives us peace, stability, longevity, an escape from a world that is eating itself alive. It is the most equitable trade in history." He took a step closer. He was not armed. He did not seem to feel the need to be. "What you hold in your hand, that is a crude tool, an instrument of chaos. You think destroying this will solve anything. You will not be a savior, Jonah. You will only be a vandal, smashing something beautiful because you are too small to understand it. Jonah looked from Olin to the pulsing heartwood. The whispers had stopped. The entity was silent now, listening, using its most powerful tool, its charismatic prophet, to plead its case. He felt the weight of his own world, the world of screens and deadlines and hollow achievements, pressing down on him. He felt the seductive pull of Olin's logic. What was the life of one person when weighed against a perfect, timeless sanctuary? Reese understood, Jonah said, his grip tightening on the package. He understood that a cage, no matter how beautiful, is still a cage. Reese was a child, Olin countered, his voice losing a fraction of its calm. Blinded by sentiment, he could not see the great tapestry. He only saw a single, frayed thread. But you are a man of logic, a man who builds systems. Look at this system, Jonah. It works. It is perfect. There is a place for you in it. Lay down that package. Kneel. And you will be given a life that extends into centuries. You will see the world outside crumble to dust while you remain here, safe, in the arms of a god. Olin extended a hand. It was an invitation, an offer of apotheosis. Kneel and become a part of the whole, or stand and be erased. Chapter 10. The Voice of the Root. The offer hung in the silent, glowing cavern. Jonah looked at Olin's outstretched hand, then at the heartwood pulsing behind him. The entity was a palpable presence, its immense, ancient will focused entirely on him. It was a moment of absolute clarity. He could accept, and his life, his identity, would be slowly, painlessly dissolved over centuries into the quiet servitude he had seen in the red-eyed tenders. Or he could refuse, and his existence would end here, violently and completely. Your God is a parasite, Jonah said, his voice ringing with a conviction he did not know he possessed. It doesn't offer life. It offers undeath. It feeds on pain and fear. There is no beauty in that. Olin's smile finally vanished. His face hardened into a mask of cold disappointment. A shame, he sighed. I had hoped you would comprehend. The small mind can only see the small picture. The sacrifice of the cell is meaningless when the body thrives. He took another step forward. But you are right about one thing. It does feed. And its appetite is very, very specific. As Olin spoke, his voice began to change. It deepened, and a low, resonant hum vibrated beneath his words, the same hum Jonah had heard in the wind on his first night. It was the sound of the forest itself. Olin's eyes, already tinged with red, began to glow with a soft, amber light, the same light as the sap Goliath. You think you are speaking to a man, the new, layered voice said, a voice that was both Olin and something far older. You are speaking to the vessel, the favored hand. I am the system you so admire. I am the root. I am the wood. I am the hunger. The consciousness of the entity was now looking at Jonah through Olin's eyes. The psychic pressure returned, 100-fold stronger than the whispers. It was not an attack. It was a simple statement of presence, an elephant reminding an ant of the difference in their mass. Images flooded Jonah's mind, unbidden. He saw his old life, the sterile office, the meaningless code scrolling on a screen, the lonely apartment, the taste of microwave dinners. He saw the world outside the forest, cities choked with pollution, people staring at screens, a world of frantic, desperate noise signifying nothing. The entity was showing him the sickness he had tried to escape. Then the vision shifted. It showed him this place, the forest, through its own perception. It did not see individual trees but a single interconnected whole. It felt the slow, patient passage of centuries. It felt the sun, the rain, the turning of the seasons. It perceived the cultists not as individuals but as beneficial bacteria, a colony living on its skin, performing a useful function. And it perceived Jonah as a virus, a foreign, hostile agent that had to be neutralized. "You offer nothing," the voice of the root boomed, using Olin's mouth as a speaker. "You are chaos. You are entropy. You are the scream of the wire. I am order. I am permanence. I am the song of the wood." Olin's body moved with an unnatural speed. He lunged forward, his fingers crooked like talons. Jonah reacted, sidestepping, but the old man was impossibly fast. He was not just an old man anymore. He was a puppet animated by a god's will. Olin's hand shot out and grabbed Jonah's wrist, his grip like a steel clamp. The skin on Olin's hand was hard, almost woody. "You will be a part of this system," the root voice snarled. "You will not break it, you will feed it." Olin twisted Jonah's arm, forcing him to his knees. With his free hand, Olin reached toward the heartwood. A thick amber sap began to bleed from the central nexus, forming a viscous tendril that snaked through the air toward Jonah's face. It was not the red sap of longevity. It was the raw, undiluted sap of the Goliath, the sap of absorption and control. Olin was going to force it down his throat to make him a mindless, permanent part of the forest. Jonah struggled, but Olin's strength was absolute. The glowing tendril came closer, its tip quivering inches from his lips. He could smell it, a scent like hot pine and ozone. He twisted his body, his good legs scrabbling for purchase on the bone-littered ground. He slammed his body weight against Olin, not to escape, but to unbalance him. They fell sideways in a heap, Olin's grip on his wrist unbreakable. The catalyst package, still clutched in Jonah's other hand, was now pressed between their chests. The sap tendril, its target lost, whipped through the air and retracted back into the heartwood. "Insolent little machine," Olin growled, his own voice returning for a moment, filled with genuine human fury. He began to squeeze, Jonah's wrist bones grinding together. Jonah, his face contorted in pain, looked at the package crushed between them. It was his only chance. Reese had said it was a chemical catalyst. It needed to be activated. He remembered the feel of the contents, like a dense clay. It was likely a two-part compound, separated by a membrane. He needed to mix them. With a final, desperate surge of strength, he pushed against Olin with his trapped hand, creating a fraction of an inch of space. With his free hand, he balled his fist and slammed it down onto the canvas package with all his might. He felt a soft, internal pop as the membrane inside the package ruptured. The effect was instantaneous. A fizzing sound came from the canvas, and a wave of intense, dry heat radiated outwards. Olin screamed, a sound of surprise and pain as the chemical reaction began to burn through the canvas. He recoiled, his grip on Jonah's wrist finally breaking. Jonah scrambled away, clutching the now searingly hot package. A thin, acrid smoke was pouring from it. He had seconds. He got to his feet and lunged for the heartwood. Olin, his hands smoking from the chemical burn, roared in rage and tried to intercept him. Jonah did not try to fight him. He feinted to the left, then dodged to the right, using his smaller size to his advantage. He slipped past Olin's grasp and threw himself at the central nexus. The surface of the heartwood was not like normal wood. It was soft, almost porous, and pulsed with a warm, living energy. He found a crevice, a deep wound in the living tissue where several massive roots joined. "This is for Reese," Jonah grunted, and with both hands he shoved the smoking, burning catalyst deep into the fissure. For a moment nothing happened. The cavern was silent, save for Olin's enraged breathing. Jonah stood before the heartwood, his chest heaving, his mission complete. Then a low, shuddering groan emanated from the nexus, a sound of deep, cellular agony. The pale blue-green light of the mycelium began to flicker violently, like a dying fluorescent bulb. The point where Jonah had inserted the catalyst began to glow, not with the gentle light of the fungus, but with a malignant, cherry-red heat. Olin stopped his advance. He looked at the glowing wound in his god's heart, and his face, for the first time, showed not anger or disappointment, but true, abject terror. "What have you done?" he whispered. The red glow spread, dark, spiderwebbing cracks racing outwards from the fissure. The catalyst was working, starting a chain reaction, a chemical fire that was consuming the living wood from the inside. A root thick as a man's chest detached from the ceiling and slammed down, narrowly missing Jonah. It was not an attack. It was a spasm. The entity was losing control of its body. Olin turned his terrified gaze back to Jonah. The amber light in his eyes faded, replaced by the red of a true believer whose God was being murdered before his eyes. He lunged, not to capture, but to kill. He tackled Jonah, and they both went down hard. Olin's hands closed around Jonah's throat. As the cavern began to shake and the light flickered, another root, dislodged by a violent tremor, fell from above. It was smaller but jagged and heavy. It struck Olin squarely in the back. The man's body went rigid, a choked gasp escaping his lips. His grip on Jonah's throat went slack. He collapsed on top of Jonah, a dead weight. Jonah pushed him off. Olin rolled onto his back. A large, sharp splinter of wood protruded from his chest. His eyes were wide, staring up at the dying, flickering light of the cavern, his expression one of ultimate, final disbelief. The last thing he saw was his paradise crumbling. Chapter 11: The Giving of Ash. The death of the god was not a silent affair. The groan from the heartwood deepened into a constant, grinding roar, the sound of a mountain being torn apart from the inside. The chemical rot, the fire in its veins, was spreading with terrifying speed. The cool, blue-green light of the mycelium was completely gone, replaced by the flickering, hellish red glow of the heartwood's death throes. A psychic scream, a wave of pure, undiluted agony erupted from the nexus. It was not a whisper. It was a tsunami of pain that slammed into Jonah, throwing him back against the cavern wall. It was the collected death screams of every creature the entity had ever consumed, all released in a single, final broadcast. Jonah clapped his hands over his ears, but the sound was inside his skull. He squeezed his eyes shut, but the images of 1,000 violent deaths flashed behind his eyelids. He fought against it, using the same mental discipline he had used against the whispers, but it was like trying to build a sandcastle in a hurricane. He focused on the one thing that was not a memory, the searing pain in his injured leg. He clung to it, a physical anchor in a storm of psychic torment. The cavern was tearing itself apart. Roots thick as pythons snapped with reports like cannon fire. The ground bucked and heaved. Stalactites of rock and petrified wood rained down from the ceiling. Jonah crawled, dragging his injured leg, seeking the relative safety of the tunnel entrance. He had to get out. He had to get back to the ladder. He reached the tunnel and risked a final look back. The heartwood was now a blazing pyre, great sheets of bark and wood slewing off to reveal the incandescent, rotting core. The body of Olin Fallow lay where it had fallen, already being consumed by the spreading, unnatural fire. The cavern, the entity's brain, was becoming its tomb. The psychic scream began to fade, not into silence, but into a final, gargantuan sigh of dissolution. The entity was gone. Jonah felt its absence as a sudden, shocking emptiness, the way a deaf man might feel the sudden cessation of a lifelong ringing in his ears. He scrambled into the tunnel. The destruction was not confined to the cavern. The entire root system was in its death throes. The tunnels were collapsing, the ground shaking violently. He navigated the familiar path by memory, his world a chaotic mess of falling dirt, snapping roots, and the roar of the dying forest. He did not know how long he ran, only that he was fueled by a singular, primal imperative: climb. He finally reached the great, hollowed-out base of the redwood which housed the ladder. The air was thick with the smell of ash and ozone. The ladder was still there, a fragile spine leading up into the distant, unseen world. He began to climb. The ascent was a mirror of his descent, but 100 times more grueling. His body was a wreck, his leg a nexus of agony. Every upward pull was a battle. The entire tree shuddered around him, groaning like a dying beast. Wood splintered and dust filled the air. He did not know if the structure would hold. He just kept climbing, rung by agonizing rung. Light appeared above him, not the amber of the Goliath or the red of the dying heartwood. It was a pale, gray light, the light of the real world. He pulled himself up through the trapdoor and collapsed onto the floor of Reese's dwelling. The small, round home was a shambles. The door kicked in, its contents overturned. But it was standing. He crawled to the doorway and looked out. The Ethelberg Society was in ruins. The death of the Great Root had not been a quiet, subterranean event. Its death had traveled up through the trunks, through the branches, into the very structures of the treetop city. Great platforms had tilted, their supports splintered. Several of the smaller dwellings had collapsed entirely, plunging into the canopy below. Rope bridges hung in tangled, useless loops. The surviving cultists were wandering the walkways in a daze. He saw the elders, the hollowed ones, lying on the wood as still as fallen dolls. The psychic link which had animated them was severed. He saw the other members, their faces filled with confusion and fear. The red tinge in their eyes was gone. They looked pale and suddenly, horrifyingly old. Wrinkles and age spots seemed to be appearing on their skin as Jonah watched. The unnatural longevity granted by the red sap was being reclaimed, all at once. The pact was broken. The bill had come due. A woman who looked 90 but had the terrified eyes of a 20-year-old stumbled past Reese's dwelling. She looked at Jonah, not with malice but with a vacant, lost expression. "The song," she croaked, her voice a dry rasp. "The song has stopped." They were not a threat anymore. They were just lost, aging souls, their eternal paradise revealed as a prison whose walls had just crumbled, leaving them exposed and terrified. Jonah felt no pity. He felt nothing but a vast, hollow exhaustion. He got to his feet, using the doorframe for support. He had to get down. He had to touch the ground, but this time as an act of escape. He made his way through the wreckage, a ghost in the ruins of a fallen kingdom. No one tried to stop him. They were too lost in their own sudden mortality. He reached the main platform, the one with the spiral staircase carved into the trunk. He began the long, dizzying descent. With every step down, the air felt cleaner, fresher. The oppressive psychic weight of the forest was gone. It was just a forest again. Ancient, beautiful, but no longer sentient, no longer hungry. His boot touched the soil of the forest floor. He stood there for a long moment, the man who had broken the great taboo, the only rule that mattered. He looked up, through the gaps in the leaves, and saw the pale, gray sky of dawn. He turned and walked away from the grove of titan trees, not looking back. He did not know where he was going. He did not know what he would do. He was injured, exhausted, and haunted by the faces of the dead. He had walked into a paradise and found a nightmare. He had destroyed a god and dismantled a century-old lie. He was free, but the silence of the forest felt different now. It was no longer a silence of peace. It was the silence of a grave. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to his core, that he would carry that silence with him for the rest of his life. Chapter 12. The Silence of the World. The forest was vast. For 3 days Jonah walked. He followed the sun, hoping it would lead him west toward the coast, toward a road, toward anything that was not a tree. The initial, hollow victory of his escape quickly soured into the grim, grinding reality of survival. He had no food, no map, and only a half-full canteen of water he had scooped from a stream, the taste of it metallic and uncertain. His world, which had been a cacophony of psychic screams and roaring destruction, was now utterly silent. It was a silence that was profoundly different from the peace he had first sought in the canopy. This was an empty, indifferent silence. The birds chirped, the wind rustled the leaves, but the great, underlying hum of the sentient forest was gone. Jonah found he missed it. Its malevolence had been a comfort in a way. It had been a presence. This new silence was the silence of a void, and in it, the echoes of his own trauma had ample room to fester. Every snap of a twig made him flinch, expecting the silent advance of a bark draper. He saw shapes in the shadows, the hulking form of a sap Goliath in a moss-covered boulder, the patient smile of a hollowed one in the peeling bark of a birch. He knew they were tricks of a mind stretched to its breaking point, but the knowledge did not stop the cold spike of fear. The forest was no longer a predator, but its ghost haunted his every step. The worst of it was his leg. The Nauer bite, which had been a throbbing, angry wound, had changed. The swelling had gone down, but the skin around the two small punctures had turned a pale, waxy gray and was cold to the touch. Thin, black lines, like the veins of a leaf, were radiating outwards from the wound, creeping up his calf. It did not hurt any more. The lack of pain was, somehow, more terrifying than the throbbing had been. It felt alien, like a part of his own body had been annexed by a foreign power. He tried not to look at it. On the fourth day, he collapsed. Malnutrition and dehydration had caught up with him. He lay on a bed of pine needles, his body refusing to move, the world swimming in and out of focus. He was going to die here, after everything, after surviving the cult, the monsters, the death of a god. He was going to be defeated by a simple lack of food and water. A bitter, ironic laugh caught in his throat, turning into a dry, hacking cough. He closed his eyes. The whispers started again, not the cacophony of the heartwood, but a single, insidious voice, woven from his own thoughts. It would be so easy to just stop, to let go, to become a part of the soil, to finally rest. The thought was seductive, peace, an end to the pain, the fear, the walking. He felt a wetness on his face. He opened his eyes. A deer, a young doe with large, dark eyes, was standing over him, sniffing at his cheek. It was not afraid. It simply watched him with a placid, animal curiosity. It was the first living thing he had seen in days that was not a bird or an insect. The sight of it, so calm, so alive, broke through his despair. It was a part of the world that Olin and the hunger had despised. A simple, chaotic, beautiful piece of life. He would not die here. He would not become another forgotten set of bones on the forest floor. He pushed himself up, his arms shaking. The deer watched him for another moment, then turned and bounded away into the trees. Jonah got to his feet. He took a step, then another. He found a stream and drank deeply, ignoring the cramps in his stomach. He found a bush of bitter, unfamiliar berries and ate them, hoping they were not poison. They tasted of life. The next day, he heard a sound that was not of the forest. A low, mechanical drone, rising and falling in the distance. A logging truck. He changed his direction, pushing his broken body through the undergrowth with a renewed, desperate energy. The sound grew louder. He broke through a final line of trees and stumbled onto a wide, muddy logging road. In the distance, he could see a truck kicking up a plume of dust as it rounded a bend. He was out. He stood there, a wild thing in tattered, blood-stained clothes, his face gaunt, his eyes haunted. He was a survivor. He had won. He looked down at his leg. The black, vein-like lines had spread past his knee. The skin around the bite was no longer gray. It had taken on the faint, unmistakable texture of pale, young wood. The horror was not over. He had not escaped. He had only carried the seed of the nightmare out into the world. Chapter 13. The Sound of the Wire. The man who drove the logging truck was named Dale. He was a large man with a face like a weathered map and hands thick with calluses. He stopped his rig. The hiss of the air breaks a shocking, industrial sound after days of silence. He looked at Jonah, who stood swaying in the middle of the road with a mixture of pity and suspicion. "You look like hell's half-acre, friend," Dale said, his voice a low rumble. "Lost." "Something like that," Jonah croaked, his throat raw. "Get in," Dale said after a moment's hesitation. "Town's another 60 miles. Can't leave you out here for the bears." Climbing into the cab of the truck was like stepping onto another planet. The smell of diesel, stale cigarette smoke, and cheap air freshener was an assault on his senses. A radio crackled with a talk show, the frantic, angry voices of the callers a stark contrast to the whispers he had grown used to. This was the scream of the wire Olin had talked about. It was ugly, chaotic, and blessedly, wonderfully human. Dale did not ask many questions. He seemed to assume Jonah was a hiker who had gotten himself into trouble, and Jonah did nothing to correct him. He could not have formed the words to explain the truth if he had wanted to. He sat silently, watching the endless green walls of the forest roll by, feeling a profound and unsettling disconnect. He had been gone from this world for months, but it felt like a lifetime. He was a ghost trying to remember how to pretend he was alive. The town, when they reached it, was not much of a town at all. It was a cluster of tired-looking buildings huddled around a gas station and a diner, a place called Northwood that was more of a footnote on a map than a destination. Dale let him off in front of the diner. "There's a clinic next to the general store," Dale said, pointing with a thick finger. "Looks like you could use it. Good luck to you." He put the truck in gear and rumbled away, leaving Jonah alone in a world of asphalt and electricity. He needed 3 things: a doctor, food, and a place to sleep. He had no money, no identification, nothing but the tattered clothes on his back and the terrifying growth on his leg. He went to the clinic first. It was a small, one-story building with a faded red cross painted on the door. The nurse at the front desk was a stern-looking woman with graying hair and sharp, assessing eyes. She took one look at his appearance and her face tightened. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone making it clear she doubted it. "I need to see a doctor," Jonah said. "I was injured." "Do you have insurance? Identification?" "No," Jonah said. "I lost everything. Look, I can pay, I need to get to a computer I can access my funds." The lie felt clumsy on his tongue. He had no funds. He had liquidated everything. The nurse's eyes narrowed. "What kind of injury?" He hesitated. He could not show her. She would not understand. "A bite. An animal bite. I think it's infected." "Let me see," she said, her voice firm. He could not. The thought of her sterile medical gaze falling on the woody patch of skin, on the black, creeping veins, filled him with a primal terror. She would ask questions he could not answer. She would make phone calls. He would be trapped in a different kind of system, one of forms and authorities and men in white coats. I can't," he stammered. "I need to clean up first." He turned and practically fled from the clinic, the nurse's suspicious stare burning into his back. He was an outcast. He could not re-enter the world until he understood what was happening to his body. He found the town's single, grimy motel. The office was a sliding glass window at the side of the building. A bored-looking teenager sat inside, watching videos on a phone. "Room?" the teenager asked without looking up. "Yes, but I don't have my wallet. It was stolen. Can I use your computer to wire some money?" It was a desperate, flimsy ploy. The teenager finally looked up, his expression one of profound disinterest. "No." "Please," Jonah said, his voice cracking. I'm not a vagrant, I just need a place to stay for one night. I'll pay in the morning." The kid was about to refuse again when his eyes fell on Jonah's wrist. The expensive, waterproof watch Jonah had forgotten he was wearing, a last remnant of his old life, glinted under the fluorescent light. "That's a nice watch," the kid said, a flicker of interest in his eyes. "Trade you the watch for a room, one night. Cash tomorrow if you want to stay." Relief washed over Jonah. He fumbled with the clasp and slid the watch, a symbol of a man he no longer was, through the opening. The teenager took it, inspected it, and then pushed a key across the counter. "Room 7, end of the row." The room smelled of stale beer and desperation. The carpet was stained, the wallpaper peeling, but it had a door with a lock and a bathroom with a cracked mirror and running water. It was a palace. He locked the door, his back sliding down the rough wood until he was sitting on the floor. He was safe for a moment. He took a deep breath, then another. Finally, with trembling hands, he began to roll up his torn pant leg to confront the thing he had carried out of the woods. The black, vein-like lines now reached his thigh. The patch of skin around the original bite was no longer just textured like wood. It was wood, hard, pale, and utterly alien. He tapped it with a fingernail. It made a faint, clicking sound. And then he saw it, something he had not noticed in the dim light of the forest. Pushing up from the very center of the woody patch, from the healed-over puncture wounds of the Naur's bite, was a tiny, pale green shoot. It was no bigger than his thumbnail, but it was unmistakably alive. Two small leaves, perfectly formed, were unfurling in the stale, recycled air of the motel room. The silent hunger was dead, but it had planted a seed. He was not the survivor, he was the soil. Chapter 14. The Sapling. The sight of the small green shoot growing from his own flesh broke something in Jonah's mind. He scrambled backwards, away from his own leg, a choked, guttural sound of revulsion tearing from his throat. He crab-walked into the corner of the filthy motel room, pressing himself against the wall, his eyes locked on the impossible, horrifying growth. It was a sapling. A tiny, perfect tree was rooting itself in his body. The black lines spreading up his leg were not veins. They were roots, drawing sustenance from his blood, his tissues. He was becoming an incubator for the forest's progeny. Reese's words echoed in his mind, a ghostly premonition. The bite is not fatal, it's infectious. He had thought Reese was speaking of the creature's bite, the bark draper. He had been wrong. Panic gave way to a cold, frantic need to act. He had to get it out. He stumbled into the bathroom, his reflection in the cracked mirror showing a wild-eyed stranger. He rummaged through the cheap toiletry kit on the counter, a disposable razor. It was flimsy, pathetic, but it was a blade. His hands shook so violently he could barely hold it. He sat on the edge of the grimy bathtub, his leg extended. He held the blade over the woody patch of skin. He had to cut it out. He had to perform his own gruesome surgery right here in this rotting motel room. He pressed the edge of the plastic razor against the hardened skin. It was like trying to cut stone. The blade skittered uselessly across the surface. He pressed harder, his knuckles white. The cheap plastic bent, then snapped, the small blade flying across the room and clattering against the tiled floor. He was trapped. It was a part of him now, its roots woven into his own flesh and muscle. Trying to cut it out would be like trying to perform an amputation with a butter knife. He lowered his head into his hands, his breath coming in ragged, desperate sobs. This was the true horror. Not the chase, not the monsters, but the slow, inexorable colonization of his own body. He was becoming the thing he had destroyed. Olin had offered to make him a part of the system. The system, it seemed, was not giving him a choice. A knock on the door made him jump, his heart slamming against his ribs. "Room service," a voice called out. It was a lie. This place didn't have room service. It was the kid from the front desk, or worse. Jonah held his breath, staying silent, motionless. "Hey, buddy," the voice came again, closer to the door. "Saw you looked pretty rough. Just mackin' sure you ain't dead in there. Motel policy." Jonah stayed silent. He heard a jangling of keys, then the scraping of a key in the lock. He had forgotten about the master key. The lock clicked. The door creaked open. The teenager from the front desk stood there, a look of mild concern on his face. "Hey man, you all rig?" He stopped. His eyes fell on Jonah, huddled in the bathroom doorway, his pant leg still rolled up, the unnatural growth on his leg clearly visible in the dim light. The kid's bored expression dissolved, replaced by a mixture of confusion, then disgust, then fear. His gaze flickered from Jonah's leg to his wild, terrified eyes. What the hell is that?" the kid whispered, taking a step back. Jonah couldn't speak. He just stared, his mind a blank slate of terror. He was exposed. The secret was out. The kid's hand went to his pocket. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovered over the screen. I'm calling the cops," he stammered, his eyes wide. You're sick. You need a hospital or a straitjacket." The word hospital was a death sentence. They would lock him up. They would study him. He would be a specimen in a jar, the man with a tree growing out of his leg. He would never be free. He would be in a new cage, a sterile, white one, but a cage all the same. Before the kid could press the call button, before Jonah could even think, his body acted on its own. A primal, territorial instinct, one that was not entirely his own, surged through him. He lunged forward, not with the clumsiness of a broken man, but with a sudden, shocking speed. He did not grab the phone. His hand shot out and clamped down on the kid's wrist. A jolt, like a static shock, passed between them. The teenager cried out in pain and surprise. Jonah felt a strange, cold sensation flow from his own body, down his arm and into the kid. He looked down. Where his fingers gripped the boy's wrist, the skin was turning pale and gray. Thin, black, root-like lines were beginning to spread from his fingertips, branching out across the back of the teenager's hand. Jonah yanked his hand back as if he had touched a hot stove. He looked at his own hand, then at the terrified kid. The black lines on the boy's hand remained, a dark, intricate tattoo against his pale skin. He had passed it on. The infection. The curse. The teenager stared at his own hand in mute, horrified disbelief, then looked at Jonah. The fear in his eyes was now absolute. He turned and fled, screaming from the room, leaving the door wide open. Jonah stood alone in the motel room, the scream echoing in the quiet afternoon. He looked at his own hands, then at his leg. The tiny green sapling seemed to have grown, its leaves reaching toward the faint light from the open door. He was not just the soil. He was the seed. He was the plague, and he had just planted a new forest. Chapter 15. The Gardener. The teenager's scream was an alarm bell, signaling the end of Jonah's brief, fragile anonymity. He had maybe minutes before the kid found the town's lone police officer, before questions were asked, before the world tried to put a neat, clinical box around the impossible horror he had become. He fled. He grabbed his tattered pack, which contained nothing of value, and ran out the open door of the motel room. He did not run toward the road, toward the center of the small town. He ran away from it, back toward the only place that felt remotely safe, the woods. He limped across a dusty parking lot and scrambled over a listing chain-link fence, plunging into the scrubby pine forest that bordered Northwood. He ran until the sounds of the town faded, until the burning in his lungs and the agony in his leg forced him to stop. He collapsed at the base of a pine tree, his body a trembling, exhausted wreck. He looked at his hands, the instruments of the horrifying transmission. They looked normal, but he could feel a faint, cold tingling under the skin. The infection was changing him, giving him abilities he did not understand and did not want. He was a monster, a carrier of a sentient botanical plague. Every person he touched, he could potentially infect. The realization was a weight heavier than any he had ever carried. He was a walking quarantine zone. His dream of escaping, of rejoining the world, was dead. His only option now was isolation. He had to become a hermit, a ghost, to protect others from what he was. He spent the next few days in the woods, a fugitive from a world he could no longer belong to. He learned to forage, his instincts sharper now, as if some part of his mind could sense which plants were edible. He learned to move silently. The forest no longer felt alien or haunted. It felt familiar, comfortable. The cold tingling in his body spread, a slow, patient tide. The sapling on his leg grew, its stem thickening, new leaves unfurling. It was a part of him. He stopped thinking of it as a growth and began to think of it as a companion. One evening, crouched by a small fire he had managed to start, he noticed something new. The tingling in his hands was stronger, focused in his fingertips. He held his hand over a patch of moss near the fire. He concentrated not on any conscious thought but on a feeling of life, of growth. A faint, pale green light, almost invisible, emanated from his fingertips. The moss under his hand seemed to respond, its color deepening, its texture becoming richer, lusher. He was not just a carrier of the infection. He was a gardener. He possessed a fragment of the great root's power, its ability to control, to nurture, to accelerate life. The discovery terrified and fascinated him. He spent hours practicing, touching dead leaves and willing them to regain a fraction of their color, focusing on dormant seeds and feeling them stir with nascent life. The power was intoxicating. It was a connection to the world, a form of communication that went beyond words. For the first time since he had stumbled out of the redwoods, he did not feel entirely alone. But the power came with a hunger, not for food. His physical need for it seemed to be diminishing, but for something else. A hunger for connection, for energy, a hunger to plant. He knew he could not stay in one place. The search for him would have started, however, ineptly. He needed to disappear completely. He began to travel, moving by night, skirting the edges of civilization, a phantom moving through the wilderness that stretched like a great, dark ocean between the isolated islands of human towns. He was in the mountains of Oregon when he found the commune. It was a small, ramshackle collection of cabins and geodesic domes hidden deep in a secluded valley, miles from any paved road. A hand-painted sign at the entrance read New Eden. He watched them from a ridge for 2 days. They were people like him in a way, people who had tried to escape the scream of the wire. They tended their gardens, fixed their solar panels, and lived a life of quiet, intentional community. They were perfect. They were a pristine, untouched field, waiting for a new seed to be planted. The hunger, the instinct to use his new power was becoming overwhelming. He was lonely. The ghost of the entity inside him, the sapling on his leg, craved connection. It craved a grove. He did not go to them as a monster. He went to them as a pilgrim. He walked into their commune one afternoon looking like what he was, a broken, weary traveler who had lost his way. The leader of the commune was a woman named Hannah, with kind, tired eyes and braids of graying hair. She listened to his fabricated story of a hiking trip gone wrong with a patient, maternal sympathy. They took him in. They gave him food he barely ate and a place to sleep in a small, empty yurt. They were good people. They were trusting and open-hearted. And as Jonah sat with them around their nightly bonfire, listening to their songs and their dreams for a better world, he felt a profound and terrible sadness. Because he knew he was not a pilgrim. He was a blight. He was the serpent, and he had just found his way into Eden. He would give them the connection they craved. He would make them a part of his new, silent, growing world. Chapter 16. The New Root. The commune of New Eden was a place built on belief. They believed in the power of the earth, in organic farming, in the healing energy of crystals, and in the fundamental goodness of humanity. Their belief made them strong. It also made them vulnerable. Jonah, with his quiet, haunted demeanor and his story of survival, fit perfectly into their narrative of the lost soul finding sanctuary. He did not act quickly. He spent weeks observing, learning their rhythms, their relationships, their individual hopes and fears. He worked in their gardens, and under his touch the vegetables grew with an unnatural vigor. The tomatoes were redder, the squash larger, the herbs more fragrant. They called it a miracle. Hannah said he had a green soul. Jonah just smiled, the lie a bitter taste in his mouth. He chose his first convert carefully. It was a young man named Ben, a former musician who was plagued by anxiety and a deep-seated feeling of worthlessness. Jonah found him one evening, sitting alone by the creek, staring into the water. "You're troubled," Jonah said, his voice soft. He sat beside Ben, careful not to get too close. "Aren't we all?" Ben replied with a sad smile. "I came here to find peace, but I just brought all my noise with me." "The noise can be quieted," Jonah said. "There is a connection deeper than words, a way to feel a part of something whole, something that will never judge you, never leave you." Ben looked at him, his eyes filled with a desperate hope. "How?" "It requires trust," Jonah said. "It is a gift, let me show you." He extended his hand. "Just for a moment." Ben hesitated, then placed his hand in Jonah's. Jonah closed his eyes and let the power flow. It was easier this time, more controlled. He did not let the infection run wild. He planted a single, dormant seed of it deep within Ben's psyche. The young man gasped, his eyes widening. He pulled his hand back. There were no black lines, no woody skin. But Jonah could feel the connection, a faint, psychic thread that now bound them together. "What was that?" Ben whispered, looking at his own hand in awe. "I felt everything, the water, the trees, I felt quiet." "That is the song of the wood," Jonah said, using Olin's words. "It is inside you now. Nurture it, let it grow." Ben became his first apostle. The change in him was remarkable. His anxiety vanished, replaced by a serene, unnerving calm. He spoke of feeling rooted, of finally understanding his place in the world. The others in the commune saw his transformation and were captivated. They came to Jonah, one by one, seeking the same peace. He gave it to them. A touch, a handshake, a shared meal. He planted his seeds, weaving his psychic root system through the community, binding them to him and to each other. They became a single organism, their thoughts and emotions beginning to resonate in a silent, shared harmony. They were a grove. Hannah was the last to convert. She was a pragmatist, and she was suspicious of the sudden, cult-like placidity that had fallen over her community. She confronted Jonah one night in the main lodge. "What have you done to them?" she demanded, her kind eyes now hard with suspicion. "This isn't peace, it's emptiness." "It is unity," Jonah said. He no longer felt the need to lie. He felt the collective strength of his grove, a dozen minds all linked to his own. "I have given them what they always wanted. I have taken away their pain, their fear, their loneliness." "You've taken away them," Hannah countered. "You've turned them into puppets." "They are branches of a single tree," Jonah said, his voice now holding a low, resonant hum, the echo of the God he had replaced. "And the tree is still growing. You are the only one left unenlightened, Hannah. Join us. Be a part of our peace." He took a step toward her. For the first time, he was not going to ask. He was going to take. The hunger, the need to complete the grove, was a tangible force. Hannah backed away, her hand finding the handle of a large iron poker from the fireplace. "Stay away from me," she warned, her voice trembling. Jonah smiled, a sad, placid expression that was no longer entirely his own. "You cannot fight the forest," he said. He lunged. Later, as the sun set, Jonah stood in the center of the New Eden commune. The 30 members of the community stood with him in a silent, concentric circle. Their faces were calm, their eyes vacant and serene. They were all connected, a single, silent consciousness. They were his hallowed ones. He looked down at his leg. The sapling was no longer a tiny shoot. It was a sturdy, woody stem, nearly a foot tall with a healthy crown of green leaves. It was thriving. His work here was done, but the world was a vast, noisy, disconnected place, filled with lonely, frightened people who were desperate for peace, people who needed to be shown the song of the wood. Jonah, the man who had run from a monster, had completed his metamorphosis. He was no longer the soil. He was no longer the seed. He was the gardener. He and his grove would be the new root, and they would spread, silently and patiently, until the whole world was a single, quiet, peaceful forest. The giving had just begun. Chapter 17. The Last Broadcast. 5 years later. The phenomenon was known as the stillness. It started in rural, isolated communities, places off the grid, far from the frantic hum of the modern world. A town in the Oregon mountains, a farming cooperative in Northern California, a fishing village in the Pacific Northwest. The pattern was always the same. First, all communication from the town would cease. Phone lines would go unanswered. Internet connections would go dead. Then anyone who went to investigate, a concerned relative, a sheriff's deputy, would simply vanish. The official explanation was a new, aggressive form of fungal meningitis, something that caused dementia and reclusiveness before death. Quarantines were established. No-go zones were marked on maps. But the people who lived on the borders of these zones knew the truth was stranger and far more terrifying. They spoke of people walking out of the silent towns, their faces calm and their eyes empty, trying to offer a gift with a simple handshake. They spoke of the strange, unnatural vigor of the plant life in the silent zones, of trees and vines that seemed to grow overnight, covering roads and pulling down buildings. The world was frightened. The scream of the wire had become a scream of genuine fear. In a secure, underground government facility, a man named Dr. Aris Thorne watched the satellite images on a large screen. The images showed the quarantined zones as dark, spreading blotches on the map of the United States. He cross-referenced them with another set of data, missing persons reports from the past 5 years. He traced the path of the infection back to its epicenter, to a single, unremarkable report from a motel in a tiny town called Northwood, Oregon. A terrified teenager had called the police, babbling about a man with a tree growing out of his leg, a man who could infect you with a touch. The report had been dismissed as a prank call, a drug-induced hallucination. Thorne knew it was not. He had seen the single, blurry security camera photo of the man who had checked into the motel that day. A gaunt, haunted-looking man whose name, according to the motel's trashed registration records, was Jonah Vance, a software developer from San Francisco who had liquidated his assets and vanished a year prior. Thorne was not a medical doctor. He was a xenobotanist. Years ago, he had been part of a clandestine government project that had discovered something incredible in the heart of the Redwood National Forest, a subterranean, sentient biological network of immense power. They had tried to study it, to communicate with it, but it was ancient, alien, and utterly hostile. After the project resulted in the deaths of 3 researchers, it was scrubbed. The entity was deemed too powerful, too dangerous to engage with. They walled it off, not with fences but with bureaucracy and silence, hoping it would remain dormant forever. Now it seemed a piece of it had escaped. It had bonded with a human host and was doing what all life does, reproducing, spreading, colonizing new territory. "We can't contain it," Thorne said to the grim-faced general standing beside him. "Every person it converts becomes a new vector. Its growth is exponential. Firebombing the zones will only slow it down. We need to find the source. We need to find patient zero. We need to find Jonah Vance." Far away, in the heart of what was once the vibrant city of Seattle, Jonah stood on the observation deck of the ruined Space Needle. The city below him was silent. Not a car moved. Not a single light shone in the glass towers. The streets were rivers of green, covered in thick moss and powerful vines. The walls of the skyscrapers were draped in curtains of ivy. Nature, guided by his hand, had reclaimed the city with a startling, beautiful ferocity. He was no longer the gaunt, terrified man who had fled the redwoods. His body was lean and hard. The sapling on his leg had grown, its woody trunk now as thick as his arm, its branches coiling around his thigh, its green leaves a constant, living part of his form. He was a hybrid, a perfect fusion of man and forest. He was not alone. The entire population of the city stood with him, not in person but in mind. He felt their collective consciousness, a silent, peaceful ocean of thought. They were his grove, millions strong. They were the branches and he was the heartwood. He felt Thorn. He felt the fear of the dwindling, noisy world outside his garden. He felt their frantic search, their plans to find and destroy him. They did not understand. He was not a plague. He was the cure. He was offering the world the one thing it craved above all else: peace, an end to the frantic, meaningless struggle. He turned his gaze to the great broadcast antennas on the top of the Queen Anne Hill. They were rusted, silent relics of the old world, but he did not need them, not anymore. He closed his eyes and reached out not with his hands but with his mind. He gathered the full, immense power of his Seattle Grove, the combined psychic energy of millions of minds, and he focused it into a single, powerful thought. A single, clear, resonant broadcast. It was not a whisper. It was a song, the song of the wood. He sent it out across the continent, across the world, a message of peace, of unity, of an end to struggle, an invitation. He knew that many would resist. They would fight and they would die. But he also knew that many more were tired. They were lonely and they were afraid. They would hear his song and they would not hear a threat. They would hear a promise. In his underground bunker, Dr. Thorne suddenly gripped the side of his console, a strange, serene melody filling his mind. On the screen, the general's face went slack, his hard, military eyes glazing over with a placid calm. All around the world, people stopped what they were doing. They stopped fighting, they stopped arguing, they stopped running. They stood in the streets of their noisy, chaotic cities, and for the first time they listened to the silence. Jonah stood atop his silent tower, a gentle breeze rustling the leaves that grew from his own body. The sun was setting, casting the green, silent city in a warm, golden light. His work was not over, but the harvest was well underway. The giving would continue until the last, frantic scream of the wire was replaced forever by the gentle, eternal song of the wood. The quiet had come. The forest was home. Chapter 18. The Glitch in the Garden. 5 years is a long time to hate. For Alex, the teenager from the Northwood Motel, it was an eternity. He had not gone to the cops. He had not gone to a hospital. He had run. He had watched in horror as the black, root-like lines on his hand spread, crawling up his arm like a slow-moving spider. But the infection in him was different. Jonah had been a clean slate, a man seeking to escape the noise of his own life. Alex was a vessel of pure, unadulterated rage. His terror and hatred for the man who had cursed him. acted as a psychic firewall. He felt the connection to the growing grove, but it was a muffled, distant hum, like a neighbor's party through a thick wall. He could feel the peace Jonah offered, but it felt like a thick, cloying syrup trying to drown him. His fury was a blade that cut through it, keeping his mind his own. He was a glitch in the perfect system, a corrupted file in the garden's database. He lived on the fringes, a ghost in his own life. The black lines covered one side of his body now, a permanent, terrifying brand. He learned through painful trial and error to control the power. He could not make plants grow, but he could make them wither. His touch, when he allowed it, was a thing of rot and decay. He was an anti-gardener. He watched the world fall to the stillness. He saw the news reports, the panicked quarantines, the spreading patches of silence on the map. He knew with absolute certainty who was responsible. He was not surprised when the final broadcast came. He was in a grimy apartment in a city that was already half empty, the remaining population gripped by fear. He heard the song in his mind, the siren call to peace and submission. To him, it was not a melody. It was the screech of nails on a chalkboard. It was the voice of his enemy. While the world around him went quiet, while his neighbors stood in the street with placid, smiling faces, Alex felt his hatred crystallize into a single, diamond-hard purpose. He was not going to run anymore. The world could have its peace. He wanted revenge. He was immune. He was invisible to the great, placid mind of the grove, and he carried a poison in his very touch. He was going to find Jonah Vance, and he was going to uproot his garden for good. He packed a bag, a map, a compass, a hunting knife, and a faded photograph of his parents, a reminder of the life that had been stolen from him. He knew where he had to go. The infection had started in the west. It had spread from the coast, and it had culminated in the fall of the largest city in the region. He was going to Seattle. He was going hunting. Chapter 19. The Ghost in the Machine. Finding the last bastion of the old world was harder than Alex expected. Most military bases had gone silent, their soldiers and commanders succumbing to the broadcast like everyone else. But Alex had an advantage. He could feel the blank spots in the collective consciousness, the pockets of screaming, chaotic, unassimilated thought. One of the largest pockets was in the deserts of Nevada, a place the psychic song seemed unable to fully penetrate. It was a Cheyenne mountain-style bunker, a fortress of steel and concrete buried under a mountain. The soldiers on the perimeter were jumpy, their faces pale with stress. They almost shot him on sight, but something in his eyes, a familiar rage they saw in their own mirrors every morning, made them pause. They brought him inside to their leader. In a sterile command center, surrounded by blinking monitors that showed a world gone quiet, Alex came face to face with Dr. Aris Thorne. The scientist was older now, his face a roadmap of sleepless nights and grim calculations. He was not under Jonah's spell. The bunker, he explained, was lined with a fine mesh of lead and silver, an old Cold War defense against electromagnetic pulses, which seemed to have the side effect of dampening the psychic broadcast. "You," Thorne said, his voice a hoarse whisper as he circled Alex. "You are the Northwood case, the first transmission outside the primary zone. You should be one of them, a puppet, but you are not." He peered at the black, creeping lines on Alex's neck. "What are you?" "I'm the guy who's going to kill him," Alex said, his voice flat and cold. Thorn spent a day studying Alex, taking readings, asking questions. His conclusion was both terrifying and hopeful. "Your rage," Thorn explained, pointing to a brain scan on a monitor. "It creates a feedback loop, a constant state of psychic dissonance. His song is a harmonic frequency designed to soothe and assimilate. Your mind is screaming at a frequency he cannot harmonize with. To the collective, you don't even register. You are a ghost in his machine. You can walk among them, and he will never know you are there." An alliance was formed, born of Thorn's desperate science and Alex's singular obsession. Thorn provided the intelligence. He had pinpointed the nexus of Jonah's power. "He has made the Space Needle his heartwood," Thorn said, pointing to a satellite image of the overgrown Seattle landmark. "It is the antenna for his consciousness. Everything is controlled from there. He is there, physically." Thorn gave Alex a final piece of equipment. It was not a weapon. It was a small, lead-lined canister containing a hyper-concentrated chemical defoliant, a substance that could kill a redwood in hours. "This is not a cure," Thorn said, his eyes grave. "This is a poison, and you are the only delivery system on Earth that can get close enough to use it." Alex took the canister. He did not care about a cure. He did not care about saving the world. He only cared about the look on Jonah Vance's face when he finally brought the rot to his perfect garden. Chapter 20: The Last Scream. Entering Seattle was like walking into a dream. The city was silent, save for the whisper of the wind through the ivy and the creak of steel skeletons surrendering to the patient, relentless pressure of a million roots. The air was clean and smelled of chlorophyll and damp earth. It was beautiful. It was a tomb. The people, the branches of Jonah's grove, moved through the green streets with a slow, balletic grace. They tended the rooftop gardens. They cleared paths through the urban jungle. They sat in circles on moss-covered plazas, their minds linked in a silent, blissful communion. Their faces were peaceful, content, and utterly empty. Alex walked among them and they did not see him. He was a discordant note they could not hear, a color they could not perceive. His hatred was a cloak of invisibility. The closer he got to the Space Needle, the stronger the psychic pressure became. The song of the wood was a beautiful, overwhelming symphony of peace. It promised an end to pain, to fear, to loneliness. It promised to take his rage and dissolve it into the great, placid ocean of the whole. For a moment, he felt his resolve waver. It would be so easy to just let go. He clutched the faded photograph of his parents in his pocket. He thought of his stolen life, of the 5 years he had spent as a monster, hiding in the dark. His hatred flared, a cold, clean fire, and the song became noise once more. He reached the base of the Space Needle. The entire structure was encased in a living sheath of wood and leaves, a second trunk grown around the steel, a testament to the power of the man at its peak. The elevators were dead. He had to climb. He found a way up through the emergency stairwell, a dark, spiraling tunnel through the heart of the new tree. As he ascended, he could feel Jonah's presence growing stronger, a vast, godlike consciousness at the top of the tower. He emerged onto the observation deck. The scene was just as Thorn's drones had predicted. In the center of the deck, which was now a bed of rich soil and glowing moss, stood Jonah Vance. He was barely human anymore. He was a living sculpture of flesh and wood. The sapling that had started on his leg had become a small tree, its roots fused with his spine, its branches spreading from his shoulders like wooden wings. His skin had the texture of bark, and his eyes glowed with a faint green light. He stood with his eyes closed, the master of a silent, peaceful world. Alex stepped onto the soil. The moment his boot touched the ground, Jonah's eyes snapped open. The god had finally seen the glitch. "Who are you?" Jonah's voice was not a sound but a thought that slammed directly into Alex's mind. "You are not one of mine. You are noise." "I'm the kid from the motel," Alex said aloud, his own voice sounding rough and alien in the silence. "You remember, the one you turned into a freak." Jonah's serene expression flickered with something ancient and forgotten, surprise. He focused his immense will on Alex, trying to force the song into his mind to overwhelm him with peace. Alex met the psychic wave with the full force of his 5 years of distilled, focused hatred. The two forces met with a silent, invisible crash. The glass of the observation deck cracked. "You cannot win," Jonah projected, a hint of frustration in his thought. "Your anger is a single, chaotic spark. I am the calm of 1 billion souls. I will quiet you." "You're not a god," Alex snarled, uncapping the canister. "You're just a weed." He lunged forward. Jonah, in his fused, rooted state, could not move. He raised a hand that was more wood than flesh. A thick, thorny vine erupted from the soil and whipped toward Alex, trying to ensnare him. Alex ducked under it and kept moving. He did not try to spray the defoliant. He did what Reese had taught Jonah to do. He went for the heart. He tackled Jonah, shoving the open canister directly into the place where the man's chest met the woody trunk of the tree that grew from his spine. The chemical hit Jonah's hybrid flesh with a furious, sizzling hiss. Jonah screamed. It was not a psychic projection. It was a real, raw, human scream of pure, agonizing pain. For the first time in 5 years, a sound of violence broke the perfect peace of the grove. The effect was catastrophic. Jonah was the heartwood. His pain was the grove's pain. 1 billion minds, all linked, all serene, were suddenly flooded with the agony of their dying god. All over the world, the placid, smiling people of the stillness collapsed. They clutched their heads, they convulsed, their faces contorted in a shared, uncomprehending agony. The song in their minds had become a single, mind-shattering shriek. On the observation deck, Jonah was dying. The defoliant was working with unnatural speed, the rot spreading through his wooden form, turning it black and brittle. The green light in his eyes faded. For a single, lucid moment, the god was gone and only the man remained. He looked at Alex, his expression not of anger, but of a tired, profound understanding. "The noise," Jonah Vance whispered with his last human breath. "It's so loud." Then he, and the tree that was a part of him, crumbled into a shower of black ash and dead leaves. Alex stood panting in the sudden, absolute silence. There was no song, there was no hum, there was no collective consciousness. There was only the wind. He looked down at his own arm. The black, root-like lines were fading, receding from his skin like a nightmare at dawn. He was free. He looked out over the green, silent city. He did not know what would happen to the millions of people he had just disconnected. He did not know if they would wake up or if their minds, so long held in the embrace of the grove, had simply broken. He did not know if he had saved the world or simply murdered it in a different way. He only knew one thing. His war was over. He was no longer a glitch, no longer a ghost. He was just a man alone at the top of a dead tower in a world that would have to learn how to scream all over again. The end.